Mr. Dyson?
Dyson, Eagle,
Amy Bosky, Austin Quinn Davidson.
Felix Rivera.
Forrest Dunbar?
Christopher Constant.
Eric Cross, Bernard.
Suzanne LaFrance.
Tom Lyttleton.
Pete Peterson,
Lance Wilbur. Bill Paulson.
Good. This is a work session dealing with the budget, and we've just done our first slide, an overall budget summary, and now we are talking about overview of funding sources. Continue, Mr. Wilbur.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this is a summary of where the funding sources are coming from. And in the previous slide, you saw that property taxes was $282,000. And the reason, million, thank you. This one is $300 million, and the reason is that this one includes the 18 or the 30-plus service areas. So Eagle River, everything on the hillside. So this is all of the other service areas that taxes are part of the total budget. So I want to make sure that's clear. Most of our conversation has been, focusing on the property taxes in the 5 majors. But when the Assembly approves the budget, they're approving the budget and the taxes for the service areas, and those are set at a 5 service areas vote. So I want to make sure that point that out. The taxes in taxes in the tax limit, those are basically the things that are inside the tax cap. So the bigger that sort of orange pie gets, the smaller the blue pie gets. That includes our auto, our MISA, gas tax, marijuana. So that's tobacco. That's 86 million, or about 16% of our total revenues. And then on taxes and payment in lieu of taxes outside. So that's room tax, principal and interest. And again, last year, marijuana was in that sort of light purple. This year, it's inside the orange. License and permit fees and programs, those are things from like ambulance fees, transit fares, development services. The state, federal piece is revenue sharing. We get a little bit of money from the state for transfer of responsibilities agreements where we maintain signals is probably the big one there. Contributions and transfers, that's trust fund money from our municipal trust, and then a breakdown of the other ones, the contribution transfers, or excuse me, the other special assessments. About a third of that is from traffic court fines, about a third of it's from investments, a third of it's from a variety of other sources. So again, that's where we are receiving our revenues, where our expenditures are going by category. About 55% of it's going into personnel, a little bit into supplies, very small into travel. Other services, again, that's contracts, primarily contract services, and then debt, and then depreciation. This slide is also in your book. I find this one telling and interesting because it really breaks down by department the total amount of budget that we have by department and their percentage. The thing I will point out in this slide, we break out debt service and we break out depreciation. So if you look at the police department's budget and they have debt, the number that you see here will be a little bit smaller than you see in the police department's total budget, because in this slide we take out debt. Where you're going to see the biggest difference is in maintenance and operations, because most of the debt is in M&O. IT will be a very same thing, because most of the technology, particularly the depreciation, is part of their budget. So, but suffice it to say that similar to last year, we're investing a lot into public safety, but 40% of our resources are in public safety. And then if you look at transportation or maintenance and operation, transportation, IT, and parks, that's roughly 20%, and then a variety of ones on the bottom. And quick math, everything in the right-hand side from the library to the CFO is 10% of our budget. So when we're looking at where we're spending our resources, we've got a lot of departments that are doing a great job, particularly those that are supporting our direct service departments with the resources that they have.
Yes, Mr. Bosky.
Lance, I'm trying to track your math. So when you count 40% of the budget as being public safety, are you just counting police and fire?
I am.
Okay.
So if you included a portion of Health and Human Services, a slice of that for public safety things they do
And
to
a
support
slice of
public
debt
safety,
service probably.
you could take some of that and some of the work that Parks does, but for this illustration, I focus on police and fire.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Okay.
I'm curious how, can I, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Croft.
Depreciation at 10 million. That's just a depreciation on our buildings? It's just a book transfer?
Mostly it's a depreciation of our technology, so it includes SAP, which is a significant portion of that depreciation, and then most of the other technology that we have is in, so desktop information, desktops, all of the technology and hardware, software is primarily where it's in that depreciation.
It's not a cash expenditure, it's an accounting function, right? Are you putting things into an account to then pay for the new product?
It is not appropriated money, and we are not putting it into an account.
Okay, thank you.
Please continue.
Thank you. So this slide you've seen before. I won't belabor this one too much, but we are looking at. We'll talk. The police chief will talk a little bit about what's going on in his budget. I will mention in this one where you see the fire department's budget. The fire department has an academy that they're going to start this year. They're going to continue into next year. The amount of money that we know that they're not going to use all of those resources. Our plan is to roll that into 2019. You won't see it in your budget book. When they finish 18, the amount of balance they have, we will come before the assembly. We will do a supplemental. We will add that to their budget in 19 to make sure that they can continue the fire academy that they have that they're working on.
Mr. Trainee.
Vince, would you define, you got housing and homelessness. Define exactly what that entails.
So 150,000 of that is to support camp cleanup, and we'll talk about that when we get to Parks and Recreation. And on homelessness piece, there's 350,000 of that, $500,000 that will be supporting the mobile intervention team, the outreach coordinator, and I believe there's a little bit of money in there from batch, but when we get to DHHS, I'll look to them to explain a bit more.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Dyson.
Thank you. If you haven't, when you get to each of these, on retirement,
Yes.
so is that, well, I'd like to see just a rough graph of what the amount that we have in the budget over the last 10 years and what you think it'll be
Okay.
for that. Is that a subsidy that we're paying out of general funds because the retirement accounts aren't self-supporting? Correct. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dyson. Please continue, Mr. Wilbur.
And then we will talk individually about the department reductions again. We have them from overtime in police. We have proposal closeover apparatus for fire. And then the balance of it is department reductions, either in contractual services or labor, in M&O, IT, the mayor, the manager, finance, a little bit from planning. So a little bit from M&O as it relates to contractual services, so we can talk about those individually. On the positions, we will talk about these as we go along, but to highlight some of these on economic and community development, we basically have a new GIS position that they want to add, but it's being offset with some non-labor and some admin support that they're going to make some adjustments on. The key change in the numbers is that payroll in this budget, while they are currently functioning in employee relations through this process, we will move them from finance to ER. So when you see the position count going up in ER a lot and finance going down, it's because of payroll moving from one to the other. I talked a little bit about fire, health and human services. They have a senior admin officer they want to add in there. IT, I think Susie mentioned to you, the IT director mentioned to you some of the changes she's making. We're accommodating those in this proposed budget. And again, we'll go through each one of these as we move through the presentation. Briefly on the capital side, hopefully all of you should have not only got your book, you should have received a map. And hopefully if that map's helpful, and we'll be able to share that with, if you want a smaller copy, we can provide that to you.
On the back page real quickly, on Parks and Rec, you see reversing one-time assembly limits. So when we put the park foreman and 5 caretaker positions in. That was interpreted as a one-time, and if we want that to continue, we have to do that again.
So when it was added as a one-time last year. I know that Parks and Recreation is looking at, how they might be able to sort of, I guess, reinstate that and keep their camp cleanup team in place longer, starting earlier and going longer with the 150 that we have proposed. So I know that the Parks Director and his team are looking to see how they might be able to do that, and it may be a replication of this.
Okay, but I don't want to fight on whether it should be intended as a one-time. You guys are treating it as a one-time, and so I just want to know if it's not in this budget, so if we want it, we need to put it in. Right.
Well, in Parks and Recreation, we added 150,000 in one time for camp cleanups.
Is it added somewhere else?
It will be in the Parks budget.
And Chris is saying it's added back. He's out of order, of course, but he's saying it's added. So is it added back in the pack or
It
package?
is. So it was a one-time in 18, and then when we rolled to 19, since it was a one-time, we took it away, and then when we
And then
built
you put it
19,
back.
we put it back in.
I get you. Thank you.
All right, continue to the departments themselves, and we can
I
have
will,
these detailed discussions.
Yeah, I think on the capital overview, Jerry Hansen will be talking a lot about this, and I know the departments can talk individually, but you have questions about that. So, very briefly, Mr. Croft is, Assemblymember Croft has brought something up, just to remind the Assembly how we do this very briefly. We take 2018, and whatever that number is, the first thing that we do is if there were any one-time ads as a result of that, we immediately take those things away because they were one-time. They don't continue into 2019. And then we add or subtract any new debt, or if they have a reduction in debt, we adjust that from their 2018 budget. And then we add or subtract any labor. If the labor costs go up or down, whatever that number is, at that point in time, that's what we roll, and that's the brand new starting point for 2019. And then what we do is we look at, do we have any more one-time ads? We add those back in, and if there are any things that are ongoing cost, we add those things back in, and we get a brand new proposed budget. So every slide that you see is going to have every sixth one of those steps. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to ask Chief Dahl to help me out if I need to. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the police department's slide here, to operating and capital. But basically, in 2018, they had an academy, so they had a two-part of there for about $650,000. Excuse me, $350,000 to do an academy in 18. That academy is in process. They had some additional money for fleet contribution to buy more vehicles, so that was a one-time hit. And then we did give them some one-time money in a supplemental as a result of some litigation and suits. So those were one-time dollars. Then we looked at their debt, any GO bonds they had, tax anticipation notes. So basically, we borrow money to basically dip into our cash pool to keep the police department until we get the taxes collected. So that's a little bit of money there. It's a one-time piece. The $1.9 million, that is the goal of the increase in their salaries from 2018 to 2019. And then again, we made some adjustments in fleet. And so that is the role for, and then that's where we start from. So their continuation budget's about $500,000 more than where we started in 18. Then we added a police academy in 2019, and then to Mr. Dyson's, Assemblymember Dyson's point, that $5.4 million of contributions to retirement. This is added to police and to fire. Police portion is $3.2 million, or about $3.2 million. So that we add in, and then we have some additional resources for some non-sworns, depending on how they hire and who they hire and when they hire. It could be 2 to 3 positions in 2019. And then we've included the funding necessary to support their move to the new building downtown, which it's all in for lease contributions, utilities, everything that's required to do that, 2.4. Reduction in their overtime, about 1.5. And then police and fire retirement medical cost adjustment, there's an additional cost of about $15,000. So their budget as of April of last year was $113 million. Their proposed budget's $118.5. But you can see that most of that is either in the retirement or in the downtown headquarters building. So that's a quick summary of police department's proposed operating budget.
Before we go into questions, so just a note on sort of process here. Are we going to have, is this going to be one slide per, no, we've got a number of others for police before we
So
go forward,
this will
right?
be the only summary slide for every department. Will be a slide like this. If they have a capital, we'll give them a capital slide.
Okay, so this is the appropriate time then for questions relating to the police operating budget.
Correct.
So we had a couple people in the queue, Mr. Trainee and Mr. Croft.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On this one, I see 3 positions being added, but that's not realistic. I hear the number is 20 they need. So what they're looking at, this is the tip of the iceberg with 3, and then next first quarter budget revision, go come asking for more, or we're just projecting 3 now, and next year we'll up it to the 20 that we need. Because 3 is not realistic given how many officers we've added. You have to have a bigger support staff than that.
Well, I can talk about fiscal constraint, and the chief can address what is actually, when we built this budget, we do have some constraints. The amount of ability, at least in this proposed budget, is to allow for 3 positions, 2 or 3 positions in this. So that it's, from a financial perspective, that's what it is. And I know that this department and many other departments have needs that they would have liked to add to the budget, but we were not able to accommodate. But I'll let the chief add to that.
Thank you, sir. And I would just agree with what Mr. Wilbur said. I mean, we're cognizant of the fact that there is obviously a limit on the amount of resources that can be applied to the police department, and so we're trying to balance all of our various needs out. Non-sworn is definitely one of them. The 3 positions that we're adding, we intend to add to the dispatch center. The dispatch center is frankly one of our larger users of overtime. And so by adding staff there, replacing some staff that has been out on long-term medical leave and they've now separated or retired. So we think we can increase the overall number of employees who are actually working there and kind of help reduce that. So, you know, I don't think that 3 is the all-in number that we would like to have. It was just the number that we felt that we could fit into this year's budget.
Chief, how about evidence technicians?
We could use some more evidence technicians as well, although we have a couple of vacancies there now that we're trying to fill. So while we work through trying to fill those, I think I'd rather add to the dispatch center first. And the reason is one of the most common concerns we hear about the police department is people calling and having to wait for a long time to talk to somebody. And so that's a priority for me. And then also because they're just to kind of maintain the minimum staffing level there right now, we're having to use so much overtime to do that. I would rather have staff there first.
One last question, Mr. Chairman. Do these dispatchers have to go through an academy of any kind? And what's the cost of putting through an academy?
The cost for them on an academy is actually pretty minimal. They're not as equipment heavy as police officers are, and expendable resources like ammunition and stuff like that. But it does take some time to get them through there. But they mostly train with senior dispatchers in the dispatch center.
So the 3 positions, the money we've got appropriated will cover the cost of the training and bringing them online.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Okay, so we're running a little bit behind, but we have Eric and then myself and then John and then Mr. Dyson. Eric?
Well, then quickly, so this is reducing a position, but it costs us $2 million. What are you funding increases in other PP19 continuation?
So I can address that, Mr. Chairman. So when we take the entire police department and we look at all of the costs as it relates to the positions based on bargaining unit, we roll that number forward. The total cost based on the bargaining unit and all the personnel in there, that increased cost for the 600 folks in the police department is about $2 million. So that's the in cost. In 2018, what occurred is that the department had a position that they vacated, and they took the resources from that position and they allocated it to increases or other adjustments in other positions that they had. So that is what that reduction is for.
A sworn position?
I believe it was.
It's a management position.
Management position, thank
It's
you.
one of the captains.
And then overtime reduction, what's the total overtime you budgeted for 19?
It's, their total amount was 3.8 million.
And then you reduced it by 1.5?
I'll confirm that, but yeah. that sounds
And that's
right.
because we're bringing more officers online, we really think we're not going to need that overtime?
Well, when we add more officers to the force, the amount of overtime should go down. That's not to say that they will not have overtime.
No, I know, but you think it'll go down by 50% or 40%?
That's what,
We're going to try really hard to manage the overtime. Like I mentioned earlier, we face some budget constraints, and there are things that we need to do, and we have to find a place to try to have some reduction. So this is an area that we can have some influence. When you see the department's total overtime usage, like at the end of the year, a substantial amount of that is overtime that comes in the form of grants or contract work, like when Alaska DOT has construction on the highway and you see police officers there and they're on overtime. It shows up as an overtime expenditure in our budget, but we ultimately get reimbursed for it. So, we're gonna try to have some influence there and use less overtime, and as a result of filling some of the positions that were occupied in dispatch, but people not actually coming to work, adding some staff there. We've gone through a pretty significant cycle of adding new positions, sworn positions to the police department over the last few years. 2019 is projected to be more of a maintenance, where we're trying to maintain about 450 sworn. So we'll have academies, but it's not the growth type of ad that we've been doing. So I think when you take all those things together, it gives us an opportunity to try to control the overtime a little bit better.
Okay,
Thank you. So I have two questions, Chief, on the new headquarters. The first is, so it's about $2.4 million. Is that higher than we were expecting for these costs? And if so, why or why not?
I don't think so. I think that the lease portion of that is about 1.5, give or take a little.
That is what we
And
were
I think
thinking.
that's been pretty consistent throughout the process, that we thought that's about what it would be. And it's held pretty steady. In fact, I think at the in the final, within the last few weeks, kind of the final determination that actually the lease cost went down a tiny little bit. And then the rest of that budgeted amount is, electricity and heat and, plowing the parking lot and kind of all the normal things that go along with occupying any building. And I think that those have been pretty consistent as well. And in some ways are pretty good because it's a relatively new structure, so some of it's a bit more efficient than some of our existing stuff.
Thank you. So my other question related to that, last night at the Community Council, Representative Lance Pruitt said that he had spoken with some of your SWAT officers, or he didn't say who exactly. He said, I've been speaking with SWAT, and they are worried that they're going to get shot at through the glass windows. Is Representative Pruitt correct?
I've heard that mentioned from the public quite a few times since we started discussing this. What I have said previously, and I'll say again, is this building is not any more or less ballistic than our existing building. So, I mean, the exterior of the building is structural glass. My experience as a SWAT operator, shooting through glass is a pretty substantial challenge for most people. But I don't think it's any less safe than our existing building.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Mr. Weddleton.
So once your budget's approved, you can juggle pieces within it, right? So, I mean, you just have that fixed number. So if there's cost savings in some area, you can hire more staff. You don't have to come back to us. You just decide what you need and you make that decision. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. We can, depending on, the initial structure is sort of the starting point, but if we needed to change positions, like take a sworn position and make it a non-sworn position or something like that, we have the ability to do that.
Thanks.
All right. Mr. Dyson.
Thank you. Is as I remember the discussion about using the old LIO for police headquarters, as I remember, it was said that ultimately it would save us money because we wouldn't have to build a new facility somewhere and so on. So when we were informed that we're going to save money, it's really future cost of avoidance. And so I guess what I want to know is how far out in the future would we be saving money? Is that 5 or 10 years? I mean, I didn't choose to tell us that we would have to build a new facility somewhere anyways in the future.
That's correct. So, I mean, this is an immediate need for the police department, the need for more space.
Sure.
And so it's something that we've been examining for about the last 10 years or so, and designing plans and considering construction. So this is a very real need right now. So that, you know, that request, I mean, this is basically replacing those requests to build new buildings.
So it is cost avoidance, but
Correct.
meeting real-time now needs.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah. All right, and if I may continue.
Yeah, Mr.
I
Rice.
should know this, I guess, but, because I think we had a conversation about it. What do you do with surplus weapons?
They get auctioned.
Open to the public auction?
I believe so, yeah. I think we have a contractor that does
Is it
that. It's
right?
something that purchasing handles. We think we have one.
And just historically, I want you to know, I appreciate that. When I sat in this seat 32 years ago, our mayor then was cutting up the guns and throwing them in the inlet, which upset Mr. Traney and I.
I don't think we throw anything in the inlet anymore.
Yeah, and we can talk about timeline, but so you do the same thing with seized vehicles and all that kind of stuff. Just goes through all the rest of it.
I think all of our property is disposed of through purchasing.
Yeah, and that's and then you also answered this question, forgive my memory, but on working down the backlog on the rape test kits, how are we doing it? Is this budget going to help us catch up?
So we talked about this at the last public safety committee
Right.
meeting a little bit, and I told you at that time that we had applied for a grant from the Sex Assault Kit Initiative through, I think it's the Bureau of Justice Assistance or some component at DOJ. We were not successful in that grant. However, the state does have a grant for that, and I believe we've submitted everything at this point. So we're in the process of submitting all sex assault kits that we have in our possession to the state lab to be tested.
And is that going to be tested in our lab here?
The state crime lab here in Anchorage.
Yeah.
And sometimes I think they send those to other labs. but
And
that's
we can also discuss it offline, but
That would be great.
apparently a significant number of the perpetrators are repetitive. The rape test kits can't help get that, but you can tell me on how much important, how significant it is to you in terms of enforcement, get those things processed quickly. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dyson. Ms. LaFrance?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Chief Dahl, on last year's, or the 2018 $2 million state legislative grant, was that on the operations or capital side? Did it offset any overtime?
So we're just now receiving that, or in the process of
Okay.
receiving it, and it can be used for almost all of those things, is my understanding. So it can be used to offset overtime, it can be used to purchase equipment, it's not something that I don't think we can, and Mr. Wilbur could probably help me with some of this. I don't believe that we could use it to fund the positions, but all of those other sort of equipment, overtime, could fall under that.
Thank you, Ms. LaFrance. Mr. Traney, and then I'd like to move on to capital and fire, and we're 10 minutes behind. We can keep about that.
Thank you. Fred, I changed the law after you left. We auction the guns off now.
Good on
Okay?
you.
Unlike the state, these go to private individuals. The state's process is upside down. They only sell off to authorized gun dealers, who then make a profit on the downside of it. We don't have that problem here. Any guns we seize or excess guns are auctioned off. We make a lot of money doing that in the city, right?
Yeah, I didn't do quite as good as you on the state level, but worked on that pretty hard too.
Thanks.
Thank you. So let's move on to the capital budget, if we could, Mr. Wilbur.
So, Mr. Chairman, in the police department, they have one project that will be proposed in the 2019 bonds, and this is to remodel the ground floor, or pretty much the ground floor of the existing APD headquarters to address the needs that they have. They'll be able to store evidence and revise and address some of the crime lab remodel needs that they have. So basically, as they move their personnel and their offices needs from off of Elmore Road to downtown, this will be a proposal to remodel this. And very briefly to Mr. Assemblymember Dyson's comment, one of the things that you will see in the capital improvement program is in the past we've had between 25 and $30 million of state grant requests for expansion of the headquarters building. That number's literally been cut in half, and so they do have some needs to expand in the future out there for evidence and other purposes, but this will help offset some of those existing costs.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Constant, or did you just ask your question?
No.
Sorry, Mr. Constant, Ms. LaFrance, Mr. Trainee, Mr. Dyson.
So just from a marketing perspective, after next week, should the thing pass, I would recommend you scrub the word headquarters out of the budget and come up with a new name for that location, because it will probably help in the process of going to the voters to call it what it actually will be instead of what it was.
It's going to be an administrative support facility.
Yeah. So after Tuesday, I would recommend changing the titles.
Okay, Ms. LaFrance?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On the crime lab expansion, is there any opportunity to use the state facilities?
That's a great question. So we do use the state facility on a regular basis. However, the state facility serves the entire state, and as you can imagine, they sometimes have a backlog. We have folks already on staff at APD, for example, that are like certified fingerprint examiners and other things, so they can do a lot of that forensic work in our own lab. Our existing lab obviously is about 35 years old. It's relatively cramped. We would like to add some space capacity for them that gives them an opportunity to improve the type of equipment and sort of keep up with technology trends. We recently added a system there called NIBIN. It's the National Integrated Ballistics Network, I think, or something close to that. Ken's whispering in my ear. And so that's a method of tracking shell casings and firearms used in crime, stuff like that. So we want to be able to do those things. Having some expansion of their footprint in that existing facility will help us keep up with that and not be, frankly, as dependent on the state lab. All of our DNA stuff still goes to the state lab.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. LaFrance. Mr. Trainee?
Chief, is any of this going to involve ballistically enhancing the Elmore site? Because from what I've heard from other chiefs of police, that building could come down very easily. It's not designed for urban terrorism, so are you planning any type of enhancement ballistically for it?
This project doesn't include anything like that.
Thanks, Chief. Just other chiefs of police I've talked to said the design of the facility does not lend itself to protecting the people that are working there.
It wasn't designed to be a bubble.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Mr. Dyson?
So I fought against the size of the lab quite unsuccessfully. And for several years, it was profoundly underutilized. And now you're telling me that it's all being utilized, needs to be expanded?
Well, are you talking about the state crime lab or AD's
Yes.
lab?
I'm sorry. I wasn't thinking there was two, so there are.
Yeah, this crime lab remodel is for our own crime lab. We have our own crime lab inside of APD, and that's what we're talking. We want to make sure that we have the capacity to handle the work from our investigators. As you may be aware, the state crime lab is a very large facility, and there are substantial chunks of it that I believe are empty.
With the reflector, maybe one time I was right.
Thank you, Mr. Dyson. So we've been focusing on the crime lab portion. My understanding was a lot of this is about evidence storage. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
So that might be something worth highlighting, because I think it also really gets to what Mr. Dyson was saying about avoided costs and hopefully bringing things in from leased facilities or facilities you won't have to purchase. To me, that would be something worth highlighting.
I agree, and that's the purpose, obviously, is having a lot more evidence storage, having it at that single location as much as we possibly can. That somebody asked about evidence technicians and the staff there. Obviously, that helps because the staff doesn't have to spend as much time going back and forth and being off-site. So all those things ultimately are more efficient for the department.
Thank you, Chief. Okay, well, we don't have any further questions, so we will move on to fire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
So, similar to the police department and the fire department, I talked about the academy costs. They have, in 2017, we added one time for about $450,000 for an academy. Likely they won't spend all of that, so the balance of that we will move into and that's the second line, 450,000. We'll move that into 2019. In 2018, they had a bump in their overtime costs until the 17 academy could finish, the ambulances could get fitted, and then they were able to staff Medic 1 and Medic 81 and 82 for the year. So we were able to, now that is part of their continuation budget for 2019. Again, a little modification in their GO obligation bonds, taking the positions that they have in place. We do a roll of that, that's about $3 million. So that gets them to $99 million for 2019. And then, as per one of the proposals, is to close an apparatus. An apparatus basically has 4 persons on the apparatus. There are 3 ships with that apparatus, so that's how we get to 12 positions. The text in the slide did not copy all the way through, and it should say layoffs due to decreased managed through attrition. In your book, it says attrition, but when I brought the information over from the book to here, so that's the plan to move through the fire department with that proposed closure. As part of the certificate of participation for the police and fire retirement, their contribution cost is $2.2 million, so that is added back in to their budget. A little bit on the retirement fund, and then a little bit of money for the Girdwood Valley service area, adding that back in as approved by the Girdwood Board of Supervisors. So their total budget from 18 to 19 is going up about $2.5 million, but with the apparatus closure and the increase in the certificate of participation, it's almost a net zero between the two and some other adjustments. So, and I know that I've talked with the chief and the manager and the administration about this one. This is this one's a challenge, but we also know that we've been investing in EMS service with the fire department over the last 2 or 3 years. And so this is the proposal that we've got on the operating side for the fire department.
Mr. Trainee.
Which apparatus is being done away with?
So I don't believe that the fire department has selected which one it is, but I'll leave that to the chief to expand a little bit more.
Because I know you'd like to know.
Our plan at this time, our proposal that was accepted by the administration is Truck 12, which is out of the Diamond Station. We'll go out of service, and Tender 14, which is out of Station 14, which is over by Baxter Road. It's a 3-person apparatus at Station 12, so a captain, engineer, and a firefighter there, and an engineer out of Station 14 will be the 4 people that will reduce by.
Thank you, ma'am.
Could you say what the apparatus was at Station 14 again? A tender?
A tender.
So it's really, is it 2 apparatuses? Those aren't connected in any way. That's
Yes,
just
two apparatus
okay. So
to get to that, so that we could get to the 12, to the 2.4 million overhead.
Ms. Demboski?
Okay, so tender 14, that's a water truck. What infrastructure is in that area, and what redundancy do you have to get water out here?
That area is almost fully hydrogen.
Is that
so
Stuckagen Heights area?
That's Stuckagen Heights. So our water supply to Stuckagen Heights, our alternate water supply, is that tender, and that tender would also support we have a couple of trailer courts don't have the best water supply in the area, but we'll probably water shuttle from other, using the hydrant system. So the east side of town is not in that bad of shape. That is one of our water sources that would be backup for Eagle River. However, with our current working relationship with Juliac Fire Department, we will have to call them for mutual aid to provide water if we have to reply or have to respond to an area outside of a hydrant area in Eagle River.
Okay, so for stacking in the redundancy, so the area has hydrants. If you have to start shuttling water back up there, what's the closest tenders to Fort?
That would be Station 8 and Station 9, which 8 is on O'Malley and 9 is down at the end of Yarman.
Okay. How many 4-packs do we have left?
This doesn't affect the 4-packs. We will still maintain the 8 4-pack.
So there's 8. What analysis did you go through to consider, rather than shutting down a truck and a tender, did you look at diminishing 4-packs?
We did look at diminishing 4-packs. However, in previous years, the negotiations we've had with the union, they've offered that up quite frequently, and at this point, we looked at call volume and response and how we could absorb whichever apparatus that we looked at, and we had several others that we looked at. It really based on call volume and service that's going to be provided, and that's where we determined that truck 12 would be the rate that gets shut down.
And that's because there's redundancy over there by 12 where you can absorb it?
There is some redundancy, yes. We have other apparatus in the area. There will be a service reduction. This will increase call volume for the calls that Station 12 goes to, or truck 12 is assigned to. So we'll just have to assign those calls to another vehicle that's farther away from their initial response area.
Okay, and a couple positions that I'm curious about, and one that I've heard about, but I don't know where to find it here. What is this community coordinator, risk coordinator thing that I'm hearing about?
We have a community risk reduction position. We took one of our fire training specialists last year and turned it into a community risk reduction position, who is responsible for coordinating all of our injury prevention programs, fire prevention, fire safety, education messages to the community. The plan is, or the hope is, that the community risk reduction person will reduce the trouble that our citizens get into by being uneducated about safety practices, which would reduce our call volume.
Okay.
And that has been demonstrated to work very effectively in other locations.
Okay, so for our budget analyst, I'm going to want the details on how much exactly and what's being paid for that position. Additionally, there's a couple of new training specialists in here. I know in the past, the department used current officers to train classes, and now we have an addition of a couple of new training specialists. I see in the 2019 budget, it's proposed for 3. Is that how many we have now, or is that 3 additional ones?
That's how many we have now. What we did last year is we were using captains off of the line to serve as training officers, and we found that that wasn't the most effective use of the funds or those particular positions. So we turned them into full-time 40-hour training specialists, and one of which was community risk reduction, the other 2 are fire training specialists. So they are all providing training, coordination, and services at the training center. So we now have dedicated staff instead of a rotating staff.
Okay, and the last thing that kind of it boggles my mind. I mean, now that we have a tiller, it takes 2 engineers to basically run a tiller. Has there been any consideration of reducing the requirement for one of the drivers on the tiller, maybe the back one, and letting like an advanced firefighter or something drive the tiller and reduce? I mean, because we don't have all that many engineers. I mean, we do the staff, but has there been any discussion about potentially doing it that way?
We have contemplated the idea. One, that wouldn't save us enough money to meet the 2.4 million. It would be a very minimal save, less about 10% of a person. And that is a negotiated item in the collective bargaining agreement. So until we open that up for renegotiation, we have not had that conversation with the union.
Okay. And you can see my strategy is take a little bit from a lot of things to try to save, basically, the truck.
Unfortunately, in the past, we have lost so much support staff and people who do the other work besides operations. In the past, we've lost training center personnel, which has put our training behind. That also directly affected our ability to operate safely. We've lost fire prevention people. We've lost administrative staff. We have no place else left to cut than operations at this time.
What is the savings from cutting truck 12?
It saves us, that's 3 bodies, which is, Lance, I need math.
3 bodies, it's about 450,000.
Because what I'm trying to figure out is where I need to find $450,000. So when it comes to
Well, it should be more than that, because that's 12.
You said 3 or 4?
Yeah, but it's times 3.
Yeah, you have three
Oh,
shifts.
okay.
Yeah, that's,
so times 3. Okay.
yeah. So it's, the 2.4 million is that reduction of the 4 bodies, or tender, 1 for tender 14, and the other 3 for truck 12. Taking them out, it totals 2.4 million.
Okay, Mr. Constant?
Just a quick clarification for those that don't know, what's a 4-pack? Because we were talking lingo and there are some new members.
We are required by contract to have 8 apparatus that have at least a minimum staffing of 4 personnel, an engineer who is the driver, a company officer who is basically the supervisor for that crew, and 2 firefighters. And those lead into safety standards, NFPA 1017, that gives us an idea of how many people we must have on scene to operate safely for a working structure fire.
And what is the safety factor that that 4th person provides?
We have a requirement called 2 in, 2 out from OSHA.
Right.
So when apparatus get on scene before we can enter and start fire attack, we must have at least 2 people. If 2 people go in, we have to have 2 people outside to rescue them. So that ties into how many people that we need on scene to effectively fight a fire and stop the loss caused by the fire.
So we have Mr. Weddleton, Mr. Dyson, Mr. Peterson, and then Mr. Bosky. Mr. Weddleton?
A couple of them. One on this page with your proposed budget changes. You have Girdwood Valley service areas. So is this that we don't see Chugach Fire Department? So that means their budget was flat.
There was just no change.
There's no change. Then I know you have a position for wildfire in here. Do you have money for that? Tell me about wildfire.
So our wildfire mitigation program is staffed, we have a contractor, and that the only funding we have for that program is money, a federal pass-through that came through the state. We were awarded $270,000 this year. Of course, we got the award late, so we weren't able to do any Firewise programs during 2018. In 19, those efforts will start again, and that pays for that person and all of the work that goes with the wildfire mitigation program. There is a matching fund requirement for that, and we use our actual costs of the fire crews who are involved in the Firewise mitigation and inspections. That's our matching funds for that, so it can't supplant any of our costs.
Can I follow up? So,
Yep.
would that fund the woodlot, for example? I mean, you got John C's probably paid, and then you have the woodlot. Would that be paid?
Yeah, it's the woodlot resident reimbursement. So if you spend a certain amount of money to Firewise your property, you get some of that money back. This pays for John's salary while he's on contract. Pays for, as I mentioned, the woodlot, but it also pays for public safety messaging and notifications out to the public to reduce the chance of wildfire.
Would the woodlot be free next year?
I would have to check on that. I'm not sure if that was included in the grant or not.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Mr. Dyson?
Yeah, thank you. I'd like a kind of an estimate of how much of your business is just medical stuff as opposed to firefighting.
69% of our responses are medical.
So 60 million?
Yep.
And you get reimbursed for some of that?
We get reimbursed when we transport a patient. We bill them their insurance. Unfortunately, we have about a 75-78% collection rate on that. And also, our patients that we transport for Medicare or Medicaid, we only get a small portion, about 30% of what the bill is. So it only covers, we only bring in about approximately 8 to 9 million for our EMS billing.
Thank you, Mr. Dyson. Mr. Peterson.
Someone else asked my question. Good, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Ms. Domboski.
Thank you. You answered my question about reimbursements, because I ask that every year. But my other question, when we're talking about these 4-packs, so there's 8 in the contract. I know frequently they're not all 8 filled, because I know I've been at stations before when there's only 3 people on supposedly a 4-pack engine.
We don't have, we don't designate that. So for example, engine 11 isn't always a 4-pack.
You knew exactly which one I was talking about.
Minimum staffing, our requirement, and this is why our overtime budget is different than most other places, is our overtime is used to maintain our minimum staffing, and that includes 8 4-packs. So we will have 8 4-packs somewhere within this city. It's not a designated rig. We don't always guarantee that engine 11 will be a 4-pack, but we will always, every day, have a minimum staffing of at least 8 4-packs.
Thank you.
So I'll have the question, Chief, talking a little bit more about Station 14 and the tender there. So what all apparatus do we have there? What will be the overall impact on that station? And could you reiterate again what, if any, impact there will be on Sutton Heights?
So at this point, at Station 14, we have an engine with a 3-person staffing and a tender. So there are a total of 4 people that work out of that station, plus a battalion chief. The impact on the crew itself, that the engineers will rotate between apparatus. One time, for maybe one day, the engineer will operate the engine, and one will take the tender, and then they swap. So it prevents, it's good having a rotation so they're not always on the same rig at the same time. Their call volume isn't extreme to where that would cause burnout if we don't have someone there to rotate. The other issue or impact that will have is that's our rehab decon unit, and which we'll talk about when we get to the capital budget. Our decon unit goes to all working structure fires. So if the crew, if engine 14 is already on another call, it is the tender driver who would bring that. Without having the tender driver there, we would have to task another apparatus somewhere, another crew around the city to go pick up that rig and take it to the call if the tender was, if it's not staffed. There will be a delay in getting water supply to other areas. It is probably another 4 to 6 minutes for Station 8, the tender from Station 8 to get someplace on the northeast side of town.
Just to put a fine point on this, though, how many actual fewer people would be in the building on a given day?
Just one.
Just one fewer person. Okay. Okay. Let's see. That's all the questions I have here. Let's go on to the capital portion.
Okay, so the capital program that's been that was proposed to the assembly that's in your book, it looks like this. However, since that time, in talking with the chief, there's a proposal. We're going to propose to adjust this, and I will show it to you in the next slide. But basically, their proposal is to delay the purchase of the ladder truck replacement and purchase all of the air resource equipment all at one time. So basically, this is the air pack, the bottles that the fire department carries, that the firemen carry when they go into a fire. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to, in an S version, we're going to restructure the capital program to look something like this. The decontamination vehicle that the chief was referring to, the cost of that one go up a little bit. This 2.25, this is the same amount of money that we had in the capital improvement program, but it was spread over 3 years. So we're going to do the buy all at once. A reduction of an ambulance, instead of purchasing 3, they would do 2. And keep the engine replacement in, move the ladder truck out, and then continue with the air life pack replacements, the cardiac monitor. So when we prepare an S version, part of our S version proposal will be an adjustment to this proposal from the administration for the capital program for the fire department. the total amount of money is about $150,000 less than what they had in the previous one. So just to be apprised. And the primary reason for the adjustment was not to purchase the air equipment over 3 stages, was to buy it all in 1 year. That way, when they're training, when they're repairing, when they're testing, everyone's using the same type of equipment all at one time. So.
Thank you. Ms. Naboski has a question.
Thank you, Chief. Is it possible to get a vehicle replacement schedule? Kind of so we have a status of where you are now, where you're thinking in the next few years, how quickly you say to get a replacement for one?
Yes.
That'd be helpful. Thank you.
Sorry. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions on the capital portion?
I have one more.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. This is a topic that I haven't kind of gone back to for a couple of years, but I know a couple of years ago I was in this shop and I was marveling at how crooked the floors were, frankly, and the challenges they were working over there. I know we've had some movement since the new station's done stuff. How are we doing with this actual facilities in the shop? And I see it's being prioritized kind of a few years down, but I mean, where are we at with that?
So in the last several years, we've done quite a bit of investment in the shop to make it, a safer location, but also a better working environment for the people there. Fortunately, we were given some money to level the floor, so that helped with the crooked floors. We've painted and changed out lighting. We've improved the ventilation system. We're actually proposing a remodel for next year to deal with our storage space and our management offices and administration. Right now, there is a single locker room where if we hired a female mechanic, we wouldn't have space for them. We only have one unisex bathroom. There's the women's bathroom. That's also our ADA bathroom. So we're looking at future. You'll also see on the bond package that we're requesting for an addition to the shop, because the shop isn't big enough to manage all of the apparatus that we have. The tiller won't fit in the shop. It's too long. Yes. And so the shop was built in 1981, and it was built for the right size at the time. They didn't think of, wow, as Anchorage grows, what are we going to do? So it is very undersized, and while our staffing was also inadequate, this year we've been able to find some savings other places to bring on a little bit more help. And they are basically treading water to keep our apparatus in running condition. As we purchase new apparatus, we're seeing less downtime for the apparatus with newer equipment, and that's why we try to stay on top of our replacement schedule for especially our larger apparatus. But I will be back with a proposal to remodel the shop and also add an addition in future years.
Thank you.
All right, so before we move on entirely, if there are folks at the Stuckingham Heights Community Council or the Scenic Village Community Council that have questions about the tender removal, who should they direct those to? From the administration or from the fire department?
You can certainly send them to me, and then we'll farm them around response.
I'm sorry, say that
You
again?
can certainly send them to me, and then we can farm them around.
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so, thank you, Chief. So the next department I want to have project management engineering, and primarily the conversation with PM&E and Jerry Hansen is going to be primarily on the road bonds. But for his operating budget, he's got 8 folks in his shop, and then the salaries, we made the adjustments for the folks there. We don't have any other proposed changes on our operating side. PM&E, their personnel, they charge primarily to the, most of their people charge to bonds. The difference is that the watershed management team, they're still in their operating budget, so that's a primary piece on their operating side. On the capital side, so I know that there's, I know that somebody may have some questions on some of these things. I prefer not to go through every single one of them, but we could do that. What I'd like to do is just sort of highlight some of the big ones for the assembly. I think the first one on the roadway improvements. I think it's 120th and South Anchorage. I think Ocean View Elementary School is down on that neck of the woods. It connects Johns and Old Seward Highway. It's a strip paved street. I think this is the first phase, and we're going to do primarily in design. The next big one would be 4th Avenue. Some signal improvement on 4th Avenue between A and E. This is a two-parter. This is the first hit of money. There's another hit of money next year. And then a hit of money for Academy. This is a right-of-way phase, and then for Academy Drive. And for those, this was in the bond last year. We had made some adjustments and then reallocated the resources and put, so now this one's back in for this particular project. Yeah, go ahead, John.
Go ahead, John.
So there were proposals to expand that to do all of Academy. Would that be included in this already?
So this project will be done in pieces, and I'll let Mr. Hanson jump in, but this is the first phase, of this is $3 million, this is just for right.
We got $2 million last year. You know, there was a proposal, I think it was accepted to do, instead of just Academy North, to do all of Academy.
Yeah, that's in a future phase in the bond funds, yes. We're going to be looking at working on, you know, some of the issues that the residents had out there. This particular one is we have to start with right-of-way acquisition. This is the first phase. We will have probably another one somewhere just a little less than this next year for right-of-way acquisition. And then we'll be looking at the construction phase later on, so we can time this so we're close to when the DOT finishes their section on the 92nd Academy extension.
I said Academy, all of Vanguard.
Yes, Vanguard.
The next one I want to point out is Campbell Woods. So this one's in South Anchorage. We funded phase 1 in the 2018 bonds. This is the second phase of the project for construction for $4 million. And then Image Reflection is another reconstruction project that's in the proposed bonds. And then the next big one, probably the largest road construction project we have, is RICA, south side to on RICA Drive. It's about a little more than a $5 million construction project. And then the last one would be the repaving or resurfacing of Tudor Center Drive and Diplomacy over by the university area. A lot of the other projects that we have in here, they're projects that we continue on every year, whether it's alley paving or street lights or intersection resurfacing, flooding and glaciation. So, and we, inside your book, we've listed where those projects would be located. And so these are primarily the capital projects that are going to be on the proposed road bond. And again, there's a lot more detail in your capital book. So if you have particular questions on one of these, we'll try to answer them now, and if not, we can certainly get back to you.
Mr. Wells.
What is a low impact development annual program?
Yeah, part of our APDS permit, the water permit. And Christie, if you want to speak a little bit more to that.
Sure. We had some mandates for doing pilot projects, demonstration projects, if you will, for how low-impact development could work in Anchorage. And so we had a little budget put into the CIP so that we could assist different projects to accomplish these things to actually meet the APDES goals.
Okay, great. I'll bring it about. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Welton. Any other questions? Okay, let's keep going.
Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Jerry. So the next department up is public transportation. So in the public transportation department, in 2018, we had, in 2017, we had removed some money for fuel. They had received that money in 18. A one-time addition for fuel added in 2018. We removed that one. And then there was an additional add for match for a AMATS project that was added in for one-time money. There are GO obligation bonds, and then you take the salaries and adjustments for the entire department and you roll them to 2019. That's an additional $35,000 was it's their total budget to pretty close, they're starting for 2019 pretty close to where they were in 18. The biggest change is an addition of $527,000, and what this would be a contribution to support the neighborhood service, and it would be support for half of the year. The current contract we have goes through June. The service would be supported for the remainder of the year in part with property tax money, and it would also be supported with grant funds. So the total addition would be 17 positions starting in the second half of the year. Again, that's to bring the current service that we have with contracted inside the house there, inside the transit department. So that's the largest change for public transportation.
Yep, Mr. Weldon.
Okay, and I asked about this before and got it asked from Bill, but I don't think I got grasped it all. So we have in South Anchorage, 2 in the morning, 2 in the evening, 22-foot buses going down. Again, some people, but that's not all. That's not all of it. It might be part, but we also have some smaller buses up north doing a similar thing, piecing things together. Is this, we maintain those and add?
So this is maintaining the current neighborhood routes, the commuter routes, and commuter routes. So Eagle River, Mountain View, Government Hill, the Senior Center, Centennial Village, and then South Anchorage. So
We're
this is
talking
maintaining the service.
To the non-professionals, that's the 22-foot buses.
Yes.
And it's a contractor doing that.
Currently, yes.
And you want to bring it in-house.
Yes. So what was originally established was a pilot program that expires June 30, 2019. So with that pilot project expiring, we were then asked to look at what are our options at continuing that level of service. This is one of the proposals for continuing that level.
Is it cheaper to bring it in-house than a contract?
I would not say it's cheaper at this point, but what it does do is it gives us more control over the quality of the service that we're providing, a little bit more autonomy, and it allows us to adjust the service as needed. So I think right now, looking at it as a cost savings, I would not be selling it that way.
Can you tell me how much more it will cost us than doing it with contractors?
So one of the benefits of bringing this in-house is that we can fully utilize our CMAQ grant. The way that the pilot was set up, we have only been able to use a fraction of that grant, which is why more operating dollars have been required to use the neighborhood route and commuter service. So what this does is it allows us to bring it in-house, and it's currently, it was currently budgeted at about 1.4 to 1.6-ish. And right now, we look at bringing it in-house with all of the drivers being CDL certified at one workforce. Sorry, I'm not sure what the right word would be. But all the drivers would come in at the same tier, same level. And that is probably going to look at, for 2019, it cost about $1.7 million. So that's tracking with what the contracted services was costing us.
And to put one underline on what Jamie said, part of this change does mean that the whole system costs a little more, but it allows us to spend more of other people's money on it. So our
allows
net
us
costs
to use our whole CMAQ allocation to be able to use it.
So how much more CMAQ money will we get?
So we will be able to, right now, we're estimating about $1.8 million in CMAQ money to be available if we bring it in-house and follow that process.
I'm sorry, how much more?
1.8 million.
More.
Well, substantially more than. So we spend this, what do we get? And what are you going to use the rest of that money for?
So the rest of the money will probably go towards bus stop improvements and things like that. Eligible CMAQ activities that we haven't been able to fully fund and utilize over the years.
Can you restate what CMAQ stands for, the acronym?
Yes.
Congestion mitigation and air quality.
It's a federal program.
Yes.
Why, if there was 1.8 million sitting out there, or whatever it was, why didn't we do this before?
Because we didn't put it out for a competitive process. The procurement method is what, I don't want to say hamstring us, but the procurement method that we went to go ahead and facilitate the immediate need to put the neighborhood routes in place, it reduced our ability to fully actualize the CMAQ grant. So either going out for a competitive process and putting it out for bid and potentially having the same contractor bid it, that's an option. But at this point, bringing it in-house, we really feel like we have an ability to impact the user experience, the writer experience, and help subsidize the workforce. Our workforce
as a whole.
Yeah.
Okay. Not sure I totally understand what you just said, but the upshot is we get $1.8 million more from the feds, so I support it. Okay. Let's see. What? Any other questions on this slide?
Mr. Chairman, if I could, let me just reaffirm this. I think this went before the Transit Advisory Board.
It did.
And
They were in support of it at their October 11th meeting. They passed a resolution in support of the 2019 budget.
Great. Mr. Peterson, and then let's go on to the capital side.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we are planning to continue the same route schedule that we have now, the new schedule that started a year or so ago?
Almost a year ago, yes.
All right, thank you.
so the capital program, it's primarily match, and this is no surprise to most of the Assembly members that the proposed bonds would be about $1.5 million. We would leverage $8.7 million in federal dollars, and it's a mix of bus stop improvements. They're allowed to use some of their federal money for capital heavy maintenance. It's basically buying $60,000 engines and transmissions, and their entire operating system for their scheduling and all of the technology that they have inside transit, a variety of other support, and some facility upgrades. So this is the best bond going for match.
Great. Any other questions on this slide? Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Damon. All right, the next is the traffic department, and I don't see John. Oh, hey, John. So the traffic department's pretty simple and elegant. There's really no significant changes other than just a roll of their salaries and their benefits. Position count's going to stay the same. We're going to up their budget with a little bit voter-approved O&M on the bonds. So they're, other than the O&M adjustments and the salaries, they're providing the same business they were next year as they are this year. So if you have any questions on our operating side, I'll let Mr. Kratz address that.
Mr. Weldon?
We added money for traffic calming. Is that operated or is that?
We'll be in capital. So on the capital side, the proposed capital program for traffic is 4 projects, or the same projects that we see annually. They work, in some of these projects, they work with the Department of Transportation to find out where they're allocating these resources in combination with the things that they see going on, but basically signal systems, signage and safety improvements, school zone safety, and I know that they have to work with the school district in identifying where those projects, as well as with PM&E and other departments, and then the traffic calming improvements at $500,000. So their proposal would be $1.5 million. This package would then be blended into the road bond.
So I have a question then, Mr. Weddleton. Is there somebody here from traffic?
Yeah, John.
Oh, I'm sorry. So we have had in East Anchorage, we have a very dense population and a very high demand for traffic calming, partly because we have lack of sidewalks and those kind of things. But one of the more effective things I've seen are the signs, the digital signs. They get put up, and they seem to do a really good job. The problem is they're constantly getting burned out. So the one on Beaver, for example, we go by. The one on 20th, I think. There's a number of them that you go by, and they're dead. And I've spoken with Tim Myland, I believe, and he talks about the batteries basically get burned out very quickly. We could tie these into the light poles, but it's much more expensive. But I'm curious, it might be much cheaper to put them up with just batteries, but if they're not working, then they're just sort of useless. So, are you guys going to start doing more that are actually tied into the power grid so they don't burn out, even if it's going to cost more as an upfront capital project?
Yes, those that Tim have are basically temporary. He takes input from community councils and the public, and he puts those out. Those aren't meant to be permanent locations. We do have scheduled to put some permanently in areas we feel would be helpful. So,
Okay.
and unfortunately, the batteries do go down. We have to swap them out, but those aren't intended to be permanent locations. They get moved around.
So how do we, again, traffic calming in general is in very high demand in East Anchorage. When we actually get asked for all the time are speed bumps, but we know that you're not really doing speed bumps anymore. Maybe there's some controversy. Well, actually, let me ask you that question. Are you going to start doing speed bumps again or speed cushions?
I'm not aware of the list of that. Stephanie is out. I know we've had some conversation with the fire department about problems with speed bumps being a hazard to their operations.
Okay.
I'm not sure exactly.
So I forward probably dozens per year of requests for those to Tim, and he often comes back with, well, we can't do a speed bump. We can do some kind of alternate speed control or traffic calming measure, but then it's hard to get follow-up from your department. My experience has been, beyond Tim, it's been hard to get follow-up to actually do these things. Or we get something like a temporary traffic sign put up and then it gets burned out. So within a few months, that isn't a useful reform for us. So I guess what I guess I'd ask you to carry back to everyone else in the department too is, we really, in East Anchorage, would really appreciate some of the permanent traffic signs if you're not able to do traffic speed bumps anymore. Okay. Is there any other? Mr. Peterson and
Just
Mr.
to
Weber.
follow up, Mr. Chairman, on what you were saying, is it possible to get the speed readout signs set up so that they work on silver? You don't have to change batteries?
Yes, they have this issue in the summertime. No light and snow buildup on the panels, so we run into the same issue. The best thing, of course, would be to just power them, but that has its own challenges by, the power running to light poles is quite high. You have to have transformers.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Weddleton, Mr. Trainee, Mr. Croft.
So last year we doubled this amount for traffic calming. Was that all spent? We put in another 500.
I think we can find out how much is available in the traffic calming program and how much was spent. I don't know. We can certainly find out later on.
Mr. Trainee and Mr. Croft.
Mr. Chairman, you were talking about speed bumps.
Yep.
I will tell you, neighborhoods still want them, but we had one put on 67th, and they put 4 on this one stretch of road. So now all I get is complaints from neighbors live there. Why are the speed bumps there?
I mean, you can pick 2 of them up and send them to East Anchorage.
You're not moving these things.
No, I-
Administration, station number 3, on Raw Road. We've had a problem wanting to have a stoplight there because worried about the people accidents occurring. Are you guys still looking at that? I know that for a while there was not a lot of abuse that a stoplight there.
Yes, my understanding of current state of play is that we're doing engineering and through project management engineering, we're doing a traffic warrant analysis for the one on Tudor. And that one has to go to the state by the end of the year. I think we did do the study on DeBar and the shot of that study that wasn't warranted, so I don't know if there's any materials in that, but I will ask Stephanie what she learns.
Yes, we would appreciate it. Did I cover everything, Amy?
Yep.
Because Amy's concerned about it too.
Station 3, somebody's going to get smacked when they come out. And I know Stephanie said in the past we can't have a light there, but you can have a light, like the old light, where when they exit, they can just turn it. And so it's not a consistent light. It's basically an emergency egress light. But there's just that little incline there, and I've heard from firefighters that work there that say they've had quite a few near misses.
Yep.
I mean, I hate to be right, but mark my words. So, I don't
You hate to be right?
Mr.
I do. She doesn't want someone to get hurt.
That's
Mis-
exactly right.
She wants to be right, but she doesn't want someone to get injured. That's right.
Mr. Cross.
You got it.
I know we're on time frame, but everything he said, but put in West Anchorage where he put in East Anchorage. Ms. Quinn Davidson and I are dealing with the traffic in front of West High and having to re-explain why a speed bump isn't likely there, but other things are possible. We hear from it as much as you do as on this issue.
Thank you, Mr. Croft. Okay, are there any other questions or comments on the capital improvement budget? Okay.
Excuse me, I just have a technical.
Yes.
When we put a speed bump in, do we have to put warning signs in? Yes?
Yes.
Right, and are there, as I understood it, you could do temporary speed bumps that can be picked up and moved?
It's actually cheaper to do permanently.
Sorry?
It's
Say it
actually
again?
cheaper to put it in permanently and take them out than
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So we have on the budget, on the schedule, we have a break right now, but in lieu of that, we're going to push forward. If you want food, come get food. If you need to use the bathroom, get up and use the bathroom, but we're not going to take a real break. We're going to keep going. All right, so we are on to, I think, management operations. Maintenance and
Okay,
operations.
so maintenance and operations department, so this is a department in charge of our streets and our facilities. So we brought this up yesterday at the Assembly's Budget Finance Committee. In 2018, we provided Alan Chagowski and his team an extra $500,000 above about the $10 million that they have budgeted for snow removal every year. And so in 2019, we're not giving them that one-time hit of money in 2019. Also, we had some one-time money just fund some support out at the cemetery. Their general obligation bonds, this one's actually going down as a result of information that we get from bond counsel on how much obligation bonds were to adjust. Their salaries, basically a rolling of their salaries is about $230,000, and then we have some fleet adjustments that will be in their budget for $223,000. So that gets them, their personnel count is going to remain the same. Their budget is going down is when we start for 2019. And as part of meeting the reductions that we needed to do, that we heard from police and fire, maintenance and operations, they have proposed a couple. One is to reduce their contributions into major facility repairs to by about $110,000. That'll leave them about $475,000, a little bit more left, and then reduce the professional services that they have a contract with by about $272,000. We would increase their bonds, approved bonds, by $500,000, and then similarly, Goodwood Valley has made some changes to their service out there, so their net increase, their net budget is about $1 million less than it was in the approved 2018 budget. So that's their operating side, and then their capital side we'll get to next. A lot of maintenance on a lot of facilities. So before we get there, Mr. Chairman, if you have any questions for Mr. Chakowski, I'll let you fire away.
Any questions on the operating budget for M&O? Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Wellington.
Who owns 100th Avenue?
So 100th Avenue?
We own it. That's state, our city, the one that just opened up. Correct. So what other new roads have we built that now you have to maintain them? Is that a significant increase in maintenance in your budget to maintain that?
Yeah, that's part of what the O&M is for. That's tied to the bond, that gives us the money to maintain it.
Well, yeah, but that's on the bond. Does it show up in here?
Well, no, it's from previous bond when it was built.
Okay.
It's in the bond, and then now that it's open, it will roll over to 19 for the money for us to maintain it. Correct, Lance?
Yep, and a lot of this, some of this is also going to be part of like the East Bernard Road, since we bonded for it, and then now that it's open, some of the O&M would be the adding of the O&M for voter approved would be part of.
Yeah, the O&M covers
Part of the
additional
bond.
lighting, the utilities, all the everything, so.
When voters approve a road bond, there's an O&M component. When the road opens, we apply that.
Okay. Let's see here. Mr. Trainee.
Just want to thank the administration for 100. I drive that road about every day to my daughter's house. It's a great road. It's faster, and we appreciate how fast that road came on. So you did a great job.
That was Jerry built it, I just get to fix
I
it
know,
and
but
maintain it.
I appreciate it. Other thing is, we're not going to give you extra money for snow removal. You're planning an easy winter or what?
Yes.
I'm rolling the dice.
Okay, because I know you're going to be, if we get hit by heavy snow, you're going to be coming back to ask for revisions
Yes,
on it.
yes,
So keep in mind, we
Sure.
have no way of telling some of the snow or not.
We will manage it to the best of our ability, our expenses.
So, I have a question on a follow-up question to that, Lance. So, see if I can formulate this correctly. So, we've talked a lot in the last 2 years about our relationship with the state, with the transfer responsibility agreements, those kind of things. You know, to what degree are the state's choices reflected here? You know, the state has been cutting snow removal. How has that been impacting us? I know they've taken some sidewalk maintenance machines out of operations, for example. To what degree are we just taking over that kind of thing, and how closely are you coordinating with them?
We are not taking over their operation, but we do still work as a team to try to do what we can to keep the pedestrian facilities open as soon as we can.
Yeah.
We did some pilot stuff last year where we worked as a team as far as hauling snow together. That was pretty successful, so we'll continue to do those things. It's at zero cost really to us. We're just doing joint efforts on roads that are right next to each other, so it's a win-win for us.
Okay. Mr. Waddleton, you have a question?
Don't take a bite before you want to raise my hand. But just to highlight something that I think is a big thing for the hillside is a road like Upper Huffman and I think maybe Jarman, but it's a very low level for Alaska DOT to do those, but they're very steep, turn into a huge amount of accidents there. And the limited road service area, plowers are going up and down it. So they worked out a deal where DOT will reimburse the LURS's contractor in gravel, which is copying what's been done in Eagle River for many years. So that's just gone through, and I think Maury was part of that, and Kathy Giesel worked on that. Everyone agreed on the goal. It's huge, very important. We figured out a way to make it happen. On your issue.
Yeah.
We spent part of the summer looking at some of DOT had asked us to look at could we take over some of their stuff, but it's just not cost effective to us. But some of the proposals we did to them, back to them, was they may consider contracting out some of those roads up on the upper hillside since they're a priority for what they do with that information. I don't know. We ran some numbers for them, but that's in their bulk report now. So.
Yeah, just a preview for our newest member, you are going to get a ton of complaint emails during the winter for like Northern Lights, Minnesota, Tudor, and state roads.
They'll go to Forest. Just remember that.
And then they go to the state.
That's the chair's responsibility.
That's right. Well, I won't be the chair come to January. Mr. Dyson.
Thank you. So it's a perennial issue, and everybody can see that it makes sense to integrate the whole snow clearing. My view is the state ought to be taking care of the through roads and go somewhere else, and everything else ought to be ours. But two things, you guys supported me, but in our legislative request, I put in there for the state, when they're renewing their contracts, operating engineers and others that road clearing, to do whatever necessary to make sure there aren't labor contracts, impediments to us working out a better solution. They're minor, but there are a couple, three of them. But Mark Lucan, head of DOT from the state's a long-standing friend, and he just rolls his eyes when I talk to him about doing the logical thing here. And the reality is the state's financial problems are significantly worse than ours and not easily fixed. And if we took over a bunch of roads, they would owe us a reimbursement for taking those over, and then finding a funding source is is pretty spooky, so appreciate everybody working on it and everything we can do and stuff. My sense of the state people is they're, as you're seeing, glad to work with us and so on, but for all you young folks here, don't ever give up on working this, and every time you get a chance to remove the impediments and try to make it work.
Thanks, Dan. Thank you, Mr. Dyson. Mr. Peterson, were you in the queue? And then we'll move on.
All right, thank you. As long as we're talking about snow removal, we had a little bit of a controversy where we weren't able to use a snow dump a year or so ago. Have we solved that problem? Have we made a deal about that?
What we're gonna do this year, we're gonna lease that site from the airport. Robin Ward's working on the final numbers, but we're gonna lease that site, and then we're also working to use a piece of municipal land just to the south of it. We're working to get our own we're trying to get a long-term site that we will own, so that will take care of the issue.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, let's move on to the capital
So on the
portion.
capital side, under the maintenance and operations capital side, they basically have one really big project. The area-wide communications radio network, this is for proposed bonds for 2019. We've talked about this before. This is basically the infrastructure which allows all of our public safety folks and general government, but public safety to talk to each other. We can also have the ability to talk to other jurisdictions in the event of an emergency, and we have the ability, in the event that we are outside of the municipality, we can still have communications with our emergency service and first responders. So that would be part of that. There's a little bit of money in there for the cemetery, a little bit more for some facility upgrades, and then the Porcupine roof replacement. Porcupine roof is on Porcupine Street in Mount View. It's a building that's currently used for some nonprofits, and I think some other youth organizations, and training is going on in there, but it's a building that we own. So that is a little more than $4 million. There's a lot of state requests in the capital program. And then in the other category, we have a lot of investments in public art, so we will take some of the money to conserve and repair 3 or 4 pieces on that one. And then the other for the $2.3 million, that is operating money that would be turned into capital money to buy police cars and a little bit of heavy equipment, and then municipal facility upgrades. So that's the summary of the capital program for maintenance operations.
Mr. Weddleton? Oh, Mr. Training, actually, you were in the Q2, right?
Lance, Performing Arts Center upgrade, what does that entail?
I think I'd have to look in the book. I don't know if maybe Alan, I know off the top of his head, but I can find out. I can find out.
It's a lot of money.
Mr. Peterson. So.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As long as we're looking,
Oh, wait,
what's the 900,000 for the Sullivan?
I don't know off the top of my head, but I will find out myself later. Performance and Sullivan. Okay.
Lance,
So-
the Porcupine building, the Porcupine building, is that, you said that's a viable building, different organizations are in it?
Yeah, and I think probably can speak to who's in it right now.
That is the old oil and gas building that we purchased from the state. It has a reverter clause. It's for public use only, which we are allowed to rent to nonprofits. So we have a nonprofit in there now. They are trading rent for renovating the property. It was in pretty bad shape when we took it.
I remember that, because I was asking on it.
Yeah, and they've done a great job rehabbing the inside, but now it's in danger of deteriorating because the roof needs to be replaced so bad.
So what's the long-term prognosis for that? We're gonna have to put a lot more money into it?
No, they've done all the interior. Once the roof is completed, they've completed the exterior, they're completing the interior, the roof will complete that.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So I'm going to ask a quick question and make a comment, and then Mr. Weddleton is in the queue. For our newest member as well, you can see there's a lot of state requests here. I think those are notional, right? I mean, do we expect to get any of those from the state?
No.
Okay. It's a good point. I mean, there was a time in this state where there was a capital budget, and we as a city received a number of projects, and we don't get those anymore. Yep, Mr. Weddleton.
Well, that's a good question. So we have both of the Girdwood projects are just requests from the state. Is there, could they be just a general bond because of Girdwood's service areas?
So, I know the Girdwood Board of Supervisors has asked me and municipal manager to find out what their bonding capacity could be, because basically what would happen is that they would have, we could put it on the, it would be a bond that would have to be a double positive. So basically they would issue, a bond would be issued, they would pay the debt, but the municipality of Anchorage area-wide voters would have to approve it because it would be on all full faith and credit. But I've given them some information as to what their current capacity is within their current mill levy at 6. So,
depending on the purpose, if it was an area-wide function, you could potentially smuggle it into all the other area-wide systems.
I'm going to use the word smuggle.
That's a great word.
Is that possible or not?
it depends on the function.
So yes,
Would
general matter,
the
yeah.
City Hall and Little Bears qualify?
That's a good question. I think, I don't want to give you a hard answer now because it is like it's a whole.
I'd like to find out, but I'm also questioning this $1.5 million for it seems really low. Well, maybe Robin knows. Is that $1.5 million for the Glacier City Hall Little Bears building? To build a new one, they want to move it, build a new one, $1.5 million? That sounds cheap.
That's not for all of it. I think that's just for the design and some other issues. The building is like a full name.
That sounds expensive, but that's not for it.
Yeah. I think Mr. Croft had a good question that I'd like to ask too. Why did you, maybe it's a suggestion for next time, maybe we just focus on our own bonds rather than have the state projects on there too in this case? Because there's a lot of state projects and other portions too that we don't include and don't discuss. So, yeah.
Through the chair, Chris, Shooty, Director of Economic Community Development. So that's a good observation, but let me offer this. One of the reasons that these are helpful for us is that these reflect the true needs of the public facility. So Performing Arts Center, for example, it's a laundry list of needed upgrades for a 30-year-old building. $1.5 million of it being a really desperately needed fire suppression system upgrade. So the benefit of having these in the CIP is that at some point, if it is a pressing enough need, and I'm obviously advocating for a safe Performing Arts Center, we may transfer it out of a state request and put it out as a bond request.
Yeah, I don't think my question is, I totally support keeping it in the CIP and keeping it in our packet. I think it's the efficacy of having it up on the PowerPoint presentations like this.
Okay.
All right, let's continue, please.
I have a second question.
Oh, I'm sorry. We have Mr. Constant, and let's continue.
So the amount though, the 49,517, that aggregates up into our total CIP then, right?
Yes.
And so then in some ways it's an irrational budget, right? Because you could remove out all of those and then you would get to the actual budget, not the need, right? The need is one thing, but doesn't that put a different picture up to the public when they see these numbers, when we have these mathematical kind of impossibilities?
So this is the total amount that we had proposed in for all of 19, but to the Mr. Dunbar's point, if you took the state money out, basically it would be about a $5 million, $7 million number total.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I don't understand the question.
I guess if we're saying our capital improvement budget is, that's different than what our capital improvement need is. And so it just seems like if we're presenting to the public, here's our budget, it's inaccurate. You know what I mean? I don't know. And I heard your point, Mr. Shooty, there.
Even though we recognize that Juneau is dry right now, there is always the possibility that state grants do appear without having a budget item.
They won't fund it.
What do you do with it?
Yeah, that's fair.
Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Lance, what's the revenue source in the other category?
It's property taxes.
Oh, okay.
Okay. All right, let's continue to Public Works.
So Public Works Administration, so this is Maury's group in here. So basically it's the team that supports the administration sides of traffic and PM&E and street maintenance. So in this basically a reduction in their salaries and benefits, and in 2018, we had,
Public Works.
Public Works admin had some retirements, and then as they replace positions, the cost of the positions go down. You will see this in a couple other places as well, where the total benefits adjustments actually went down as a result of the position changes. So pretty much, there's nothing I would point out here, except that the reason that the number is $11.8 million is all of the service areas, the limited road service areas budgets are inside Public Works Administration's operating. From a personnel perspective, it's a very small portion of that $11.8 million.
Okay.
That's all I got.
Any questions on Public Works? Yes, Mrs. France?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Lance, I'm not sure if it fits here, but Fund 181.
So 181 will be in development services. So we're going to get to that in about 4 or 5 slides.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, this is like state capital grants, this is an illusion. Let's move forward to the next.
Can I take a break, Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I need a break.
Quick.
5 minutes.
I gotta go downstairs.
Who?
Hey, Eric.
15 minutes.
We're not going to take the whole thing. We'll take 5 minutes.
We're not going to get.
Yep, it'll be the length of Mr.
Because you might surprise us.
I just found out Stacy's having a honeymoon.
Right.
Oh, so weird. They have
You never know.
Who? I hear a new governor's a wizard, so he'll wave his magic wand and have money.
We have a new governor?
Wow.
Not yet. Since you're both here, I'm confused as to, I thought this. I don't know what it is.
Okay, I thought it was you meeting with Bill, like on something separate.
I haven't. I had already scheduled the IBW at 4 at this
Okay.
point, so I'm not going to be able to meet you guys.
So I don't really. Okay.
This is last
Cool.
minute. We have like 7 hours of funerals today.
Yes, I'm happy to say nobody can do anything about it. If you guys want to find out like where we're going with the grant right now, I'm happy to talk to you about it. I didn't even read the full email.
Do you actually have one?
Yeah. Oh yeah, we've been working on it for a while.
Oh, you are?
Yes. Yes.
Which one is it?
It's the J.P. Morgan Chase
No,
$3
no, no.
million.
What's the project?
Oh, so what we're planning on doing, so we partnered a little while ago with a Bloomberg affiliate called Cities for Financial Empowerment, which is an organization that focuses on financial literacy for underprivileged and immigrant low-income communities. So we had a workshop with them a little while ago. They want to partner with us on the grant, so we're thinking about doing CFE and ACLT and potentially bringing in some Muldoon space to do a larger Cities for Financial Empowerment.
This is what I was actually thinking about too. Are you thinking about the campus with the Stream Academy and the Makerspace and the
So
library?
we haven't gotten that far yet. It's not due for another 6 weeks, so we're still working on it. We're trying to bring everybody into a room to say like, who wants to participate and what can we do
Well,
with it.
I talked to Tyler Robinson at CCON. He wants to do this kind of stuff.
Okay, and so the original thought was we had this big meeting with CHOT, ACLT, and Parks and Rec, and MNO, and us, and the whole market, Garrett, and Constance.
Okay.
But
He always shows up, doesn't
he
he?
does, and he walks in and is like, "I wasn't invited, but I'm here." Okay. But it's about integrating long-term programming for financial literacy, programs like Set Up Shop that ACLT does, and other long-term financial strategies for diverse low-income communities. So,
Great.
try.
Good.
One of the criteria in the grant is that they would prefer that it's in a J.P. Morgan Chase business area.
Do we have one of those?
No. Well, we don't have any Chase banks, so we have Chase credit cards, and they may like us because we're Alaska. But yeah, we'll pull it together, and once I'll talk to Tyler and see
Great.
bring that in so that it's not just
Great. All right. All right, we're going to start again.
Oh, okay.
That wasn't 5 minutes.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Mr. Wilbur.
All right, so I think let's start with Health and Human Services. So on Department of Health and Human Services, for 2018, one of the one-time ads we had was $500,000 for the Housing and Homeless Initiative. And then we had some one-time money for 4A's mobile syringe access program. Those one-time items were removed. And Health and Human Services had a little bit of bond money in the past for some of the facilities that they manage. And those were reduced. We adjust their labor for $97,000. Then when we roll, I mentioned in the part one, we had a $500,000 for housing and homelessness. 350 of that will be going to Department of Health and Human Services again to continue the efforts on addressing housing and homelessness. That would be the 350. The department has also requested some additional resources for their animal care and control contract. Based on the contract services that they have, a little bit more on their increase for contractual requirements for some other services that they have, and then $10,000 for a language access service, and add some funding to provide some translation services. So those are the changes for Health and Human Services as proposed for 19.
Great. Any questions on Health and Human Services?
We're getting there, Mr. Chairman.
Well, Mr. Trainee, Mr.
Could you
Weddleton.
break down the 2019 one-time requirements? Because you've got different projects going
Sure.
on there.
Sure. So
I just like it. We're looking at it.
Okay.
I like it broken down.
So I will break down that $500,000. Is here, like to break it down individually, but I can. I know that it's been done. I just don't remember that.
To be do it for us.
Yes, I will.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Mr. Weddleton.
So last year we had that 500,000. This year only 350,000. That's because we got the problem licked and it's smaller. That's a question.
Don't laugh,
No, I'm not laughing. No, it's just when we are looking at the amount of money that we could add into it, at least at this time in the budget. I know that there's been interest of the administration and the assembly that there's an opportunity to make that a bigger number at 1Q or part of this process, but Mr. Middleton, that is when we're balancing out all of the other needs, this is the amount of money that we're able to continue as it relates to the services from 2018.
So if we wanted to add money for certain projects related to this, it would be either this budget or Parks and Rec? Are there any other departments that are?
Primarily, that's where we hold it. Yes, it'd probably be in one of those two departments, but if the amount of money that you wanted to add to us for a different purpose, then we would make a recommendation on which part it would land.
All right, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Weldon. Any other questions on this part of the budget? Okay.
All right. So the next, Health and Human Services on their capital side. So basically, the Health and Human Services is in charge of our senior centers. And so for the Anchorage Senior Center, there's a proposal to do a variety of improvements. There's some HVAC, I think some roof improvements, some parking lot improvements, and some other space improvements at the Anchorage Senior Center for a little more than $2 million. And at the Chubiak Senior Center, I believe it is indoor, a little bit of indoor work, and then some parking lot and carport improvements out at the Chubiak Senior Center. Again, they're listed in the book. That would be maybe a total of $3 million from Health and Human Services. I would add that as the administration puts its bond package together, we will probably put together a facilities bond. And it would have this project on it as a facilities bond. We would have probably the police department headquarters on it as a facilities bond, the Porcupine building as a facilities bond. But the services for the senior centers are managed from KDHHS. But when we package the bonds, it will be different. So I just wanted to make you aware.
Thank you, Mr. Wilbur. Any other questions on this item? Anything, Ms. Pineda, is there anything you want to say at all about this budget?
I don't have anything to add.
Okay.
Is the animal control facility in generally good shape, or are we going to see in the coming years a big renovation?
So for animal control, we've been doing some work on it. We did some work, we think last year, the year before, on the roof. And so we spent, I think, I'll have to find the number, but a few $100,000 on roof repair out at Animal Control Center. And so there's some work on the floor. But again, it's another one of those buildings that's almost, I think, 30 years old.
Okay. Ms. LaFrance?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. May I ask you just a general question about, Lance, when it comes to the other category, and that's funded out of property taxes?
Right.
So whatever it is taken and put in that column is taken away from operational funding?
Right.
So how is that determined, the amount that in the other column? I mean, because that would be the one that we have the most control over, and it's like the highest priority.
So in the other column, and you see it primarily in two places. You'll see it in facilities and you'll see it in IT.
Okay.
Every piece of equipment that we buy in IT is all in the other column. We don't bond for pretty much everything. But when there is some maintenance facilities, or capital maintenance or improvements that need to be done, and they're primarily done by facility maintenance or they're contracted out, we show that as an operating expense. It shows up in our operating budget, and we move it to a capital for a capital program or capital improvements. But yes, it is from property tax money.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Okay. Anything else on HHS? All right, let's move on to employee relations.
So for employee relations, I think the biggest change here, I mentioned this earlier, what you're seeing is moving payroll from finance into employee relations. They do have a request to add one person, an analyst inside employee relations. So that would be adding a position of $110,000. They do not have a capital program other than that. And then you can see they do have a substantial decrease in their amount of labor from one year to the next. And that is in part due to some of the positions that they've eliminated or they've downgraded and moved some money around.
Okay. Mr. Croft.
Why is moving payroll a good idea?
Well, I think we've moved payroll during the SAP process. We were having a lot of concerns with payroll, as you are well aware, and that there's a direct connection between the concerns that were going on with the benefit side of HR and the contract sides that HR manages, the labor contracts and the payroll. So putting them all in one place, so they're all under one management, is the reason that the move was done.
Okay. Great. Other questions on employee relations? Okay.
So the next one here is the municipal manager. So the municipal manager, while it looks like Bill might have $13 million to work with, he really doesn't. Primarily, most of the money that's in this, basically $10 million of that $13 million is for workman's comp and general liability. That's where we hold those, have funding it available to cover workman's comp and general liability. The balance of the $3 million is to manage the departments that report to him. So the manager's office, risk management, emergency operations, transportation inspection, and Office of Equal Opportunity are all under the municipal manager. So that's how the 17 positions come to be. We had some one-time money for a stormwater utility implementation. That money is, there's no additional resources planned for 19. A little bit of safety training materials, a little bit of geo obligation bonds, salary adjustments, and then inside the manager's office, a proposal to reduce one position inside under the municipal manager's leadership, and then we have a little bit of request under this division for some safety training material, and then some insured property recovery. So that's pretty much a summary of the municipal manager's
Thank you.
budget in a nutshell.
I have two questions, and we have Mr. Trainee. The first is, I think I heard somebody whisper this too. $200,000 seems like an awful lot for an administrative assistant.
So basically, every executive is either a special administrative assistant, it's an executive position.
Okay, so it might be a little bit of a misleading
Yes.
title.
It's a title.
course, my job title is an administrative assistant also.
Okay. The other question is, and this is just a broader question as being added tape, but why $10 million for workman's comp? Why is that in your budget as somewhere else? Seems like kind of an odd place to house it.
The municipal manager's office practice is me and Joy, but I have 4 offices underneath me in this organizational structure. One is the Office of Emergency Management, one is Transportation Inspection, one is People Opportunity, and the last is Risk Safety. So Risk Safety is holding the vast majority of this non-labor budget. They've got the workers' compensation claims, general liability claims, and our self-insurance and stop loss insurance is all in mine.
Do you feel that's a logical place to have it?
I think in some ways the meeting manager ends up being kind of a catch-all for the onesie-twosies. I'm not sure there's any more logical place for it to be.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Trainee?
Thank you. The reduction of person, is that a body that's currently there? Is it a vacant position? I don't know.
It's a filled position.
Whose position is it?
I don't know which one it would be.
Mr. Falsey knows.
I know. It's all in there.
Thank you.
Could you say that again a little louder for you all?
This is a position that has historically been sometimes operating as the deputy municipal manager the entire time that we have had an office. It's been used as variously the SAP project manager or whatever it's been called. It's currently occupied by all the time.
He's the gentleman that joined us in the school district where he ran their food program for a while.
Is he still employed with us?
This maturity is
We don't see him, now that he's not our SAP briefer guy, we don't see him as often. Okay, did you have a question, Chris?
Yeah, so transportation inspection, this is the cabs?
Yes.
Yes. So, just a quick question on, we asked for a report on, I forget the name of the report, usage and need or something like that for the upcoming year.
It's a market conciliation
study.
that has gone to the Transportation Commission a few times. I think Eric Musser is
Oh,
ready
hey,
to
there's
give
Eric
us
Musser.
the latest of the status.
Thank all the presentations were made, the commission held 4 months of public hearing. There's a draft series of recommendations under consideration by the commission at our meeting Monday night. There's a goal there. There's no Title 11 provision for them to do anything. Just so the members are aware, so they could opt to recognize the dynamics of the market now and go from there, or to adopt a series of conclusions and recommendations. There are about 4 or 5 before for consideration. But from June of last year to June of this year, about the time that LIFT and the Uber teachers began operation, all the data indicated a very significant initial impact, to the cab operations. But the data then also showed that gap narrowed quite a bit to where, looking at the first year, the impact exclusive of the airport is about, I think it was 15.3%. Looking at it over 12 months versus the initial 60 to 90 days. So unlike the lower 48, the dynamics of the markets here are different, and so the cab industry has clawed back.
And to underline that a little bit, you're sort of doing this in the same format as it has traditionally been done. It's this 70-page PowerPoint presentation with the best available data, which isn't necessarily the best data, but it's the best available data. We serve that up to the commission to see if they want to make any recommendations on the basis of that data. The commission's will decide it, but we'll get it to you before that meeting.
So, follow up to that, I've heard that the commission is under-membered. Doesn't have much of a member, not understaffed, but it has not enough commission members.
There are vacancies on the commission. We are always in the business of trying to find someone willing to serve on that commission.
Right, so 4 out of 7 now, is that right?
There's 4.
4, a total of 7, so they can't afford one negative vote on any matter, otherwise the matter doesn't pass, right?
Right, yes, and if someone doesn't show up, we don't have a quorum.
Right, and no meeting happens, and so, okay. Well, it's a challenge to the administration.
Yes, and we would appreciate any support that can be afforded us to recruit people to this commission.
Would
I-
you forward
There are-
back to us what the requirements are for that?
Sure.
Thank you.
I'll have Jason do that.
I sent you someone, but you put her on the Budget Advisory Commission instead.
Well, sometimes we like to move people around.
Okay. Was anybody else in the queue? Mr. Trainee? Oh, yeah, Mr. Croft.
Since we're dealing with municipal manager, I've got a question for you. SAP and IT, the whole complex, there's sense being moved. You used to report to chief fiscal officer, now it's being moved to the office of the IT's being moved to the office of the mayor. Why not to the city manager instead?
I think the recognition is that IT is kind of co-equal function within the municipality. So the reporting structure would be that there's a CFO, there's a municipal manager, there's document management, but IT is also carrying an equivalently large portfolio that is of equal dignity to the rest of the top level managers. The way we have been operating in the past several months is that Susie Marshall is in the executive committee, her business is affecting us as much. I suppose you could say, why not just put an extra layer in between, have her report to me? I think that's sort of a design choice.
Okay. Just would you reconsider that, because I've been with this SAP now for 2 many darn years, and you're the one that is now the focal point with this assembly. You come and talk to us about it. I'm not sure the mayor has that technical ability that you do, and that's not to degrade him at all, but I'd be more comfortable with that position of IT reporting to you. So if you take a look at it again, I'd appreciate it. Okay. And by ordinance, we can change it. It's something that's ability to.
The,
Yes, I'm working on it.
So I should have mentioned this earlier. Mr. Rivera had to leave, and because of that, he requests everybody speak up a bit, because he's going to be listening to the recording. So please speak up and project in this direction. Mr. Croft.
Oh, no, he'll listen to the recording, yeah. On risk management, I both wanted to understand in your details on page 12, there's there's a big change somehow in chargeback to departments that I don't understand. It went from 10 million to 1 million in 17 to 18. But also just generally, are we reducing our workers' compensation payments, or are we keeping that in line?
What's the page number again, Mr. Croft?
12 and 13 is the risk management details. But intergovernmental charges drop off the map essentially in 2018, and I didn't understand why.
So I was just visiting with Maryland. The charges are recalculated annually, and so when we recalculated them, that's how come they went down.
From 10 million to 1 million in 17 to 18? I mean, there must
Take
be
a look at it,
a change of
Is that
something.
moving IT over to another department?
We'll take a look at that one. Thank you.
I mean, very generally in comp, how we doing?
Our number of accidents stayed pretty much the same from year to year. Medical costs are always going up. We had a catastrophic loss last year that we're continuing to pay for until the excess carrier kicks in. Generally, though, our numbers are relatively stable. We can always do better, of course, but there's not much from the comp side we can do about medical costs increasing.
And the number that's on this page was is the program generated revenue. That's not how much we're spending on comp. That's how much we're spinning off from that fund. Yeah, the 602,000. Is that a fund we use to pay them, or is that a source of revenue?
We're going to look into it.
All right. Yeah, I mean,
I'm not sure we can answer that question right this very moment, but I suspect that is some amount of recovery that we're getting in general liability cases. But it's not net, it's probably gross, that we probably got $300,000 for cycles or something.
And just in terms of conflict, I've put on the record before, but I do workers' compensation law, but I have not, since I started running for this seat, done any municipal or even school district work. So I don't believe there's any conflict. I'm just now curious about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Croft. Mr. Peterson.
Well, thank you. As long as we're talking about program-generated revenue, what is that? Where does that revenue come from?
you can see on MM13 how that's breaking down. And at least in the risk management area, it looks like a lot of it is just interest from the municipal cash pool because we have a lot of money in the risk labor budget sitting there waiting to pay out workers' comp plans and general liability plans and insurance proceeds. And so it's generating some return until it gets spent. So that's what that is.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Okay. Any other questions on municipal manager? Okay, let's move on.
We're going to switch gears. The next departments and group we're going to have are those that are going to report to Mr. Schutte. We're going to start with Mr. Schutte. So basically, in a similar vein, while Chris's budget appears to be $12 million, $10.6 million of that is for support for the convention centers, the PAC, the contracts with the museum, the Sullivan Arena, Ben Bogey. So the contracts that we have in manage those facilities are part of Chris's budget. We had some, we had a one-time operating, we had a one-time increase to anticipated operating losses. I think the Assembly will be unfortunately be seeing another one of those, but we knew it was anticipated. I think the number's pretty much the same. And then we had some one-time money for contributions to Geographic Information System, a little bit of adjustments in their debt, their salaries, and then Mr. Schutte as well is proposing the elimination of one administrative assistant position in his under his leadership, and I believe that position is filled. It is. So that's the summary of Chris's work.
So I have a question then, Mr. Trainee. Who is the person you're proposing to, the position you're proposing to eliminate?
Like Mr. Paulsley, I have one employee. So you know who that is.
Okay. Mr. Trainee.
Thank you. Operating loss. Is this MSG and is it the Sullivan, or where are we losing money at?
Yes, this is primarily the Sullivan.
How much are we talking about? Last time it was $500,000. How much are we dealing with this time?
242.
Yeah, in front of you is $250,000 approximately.
242.
For approval on Tuesday night. And for 2019, at which time we will be paying on the 2018 net operating loss, meaning how they do perform this year, it is anticipated to be higher. So it should be in the 350 range instead of 350 range.
What are they doing to rectify the problem?
They've taken a number of changes, both management changes, staffing changes, and business operations changes. They've started offering, for example, turf-based activities in one of the unused rinks. And then they are currently in negotiations with the UAA hockey team, who's now the primary tenant of that building, with the lease is on, to change and modify their operating contract, which expired this year.
When does the contract come up for renewal?
2021.
Thank you, sir. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Any other questions? Yeah.
I guess following up on Ms. LaFrance's comment, so, well, it's in the capital, yeah. So is that property tax money or a grant?
It's taxes. Thank you.
So why not a bond, right? If I know how tight we are, it seems a bondable thing. Why should we pay cash rather than bond?
So in this particular case, what we are doing is proposing to purchase imagery. The imagery that we have is, I think, 4 or 5 years old, and it's not a capitalizable expense like a building.
Well, it's not people operating, it's pictures. Why can't you capitalize it?
We can reach out to bond counsel and see if it is bond eligible, but I'll confirm that. That's the reason why we have it in the other category.
Okay.
Any other questions on either the operating or the capital?
I might add, Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry to interrupt.
No.
This information that we make available, it's not just for internal purposes as well. So I know that Tina Miller, so this is imagery that available to contractors and developers and the public, and they want to see, what's going on. We can actually use this information as well. It's not just for our purpose.
You don't charge it for this.
Mr. France?
Just not to belabor the point, but a quick follow-up, Lance. So why is it under capital then, the 225, if it's not capitalizable? Wouldn't it then be under operational?
So just to clarify on that, the term capitalizable in the eyes of bond counsel is much different than the term capitalizable to you and I. And the reason it appears in that and not under bonds is that we don't believe that it would qualify as a bondable capital item.
Okay. But we still count it as capital? But
Yeah,
not
because it's a thing,
bondable
it's a thing, not a
capital.
person.
What practically happens if we were to accidentally put something on the bond that was not bondable, capitalizable, as you're saying, we wouldn't be able to
It
sell?
likely wouldn't make it to that stage, Mr. Chairman. Bond counsel would have us remove it.
Okay. All right.
Yeah,
Well,
the lawyers.
They do attend our seminar meetings, Mr. Chairman, and they're there.
no, I know. Okay. All right. Let's move on then.
Okay, moving to the planning department. So the planning department, basically, they're with the turnover that they've had in 2018, when we did their salary roll, it's a reduced amount for 2019. The planning department has asked or proposed that they keep a position inside their budget, but they do not. They're going to keep a position vacant for the 2019, which would be a savings of about $147,000. They want to add an admin, principal admin officer, basically someone who's going to help all of the planning department, including AMAX, which would be supported part of that, and then part of the director's time who does work with AMAX staff or transportation planning. Portion of her time would be charged to the AMAX grant, which is an eligible expense. So, and that change for the planning department would be one additional staff, and then the total budget would be down for 19.
So I have a question for Ms. McNulty. What's the practical impact of keeping that senior planner position vacant for next year?
As far as, so we've seen a downtick in permits in 2018, so we had two positions that became vacant that we backfilled, senior planner positions. So the numbers that we saw in 2018, we're beginning to believe that we're appropriately staffed for 2019. There's a lot of indicators that will be ramping up in development. So we think by 2020, we'll see an uptick of permits, and that will justify staffing that person in 2020.
Okay. Any other questions? Mr. Weddleton.
So the quarter time for the director, is that AMAX money as well?
Yeah, it'll be a quarter of my salary will be charged to the AMAX grant. So I'm a part of the AMAX advisory committee. I participate in the work sessions. I review all the plans to make sure they're in line with the rest of the planning department. So it's just to cover that cost of the admin side.
Do you, kind of lingering for a while has been rezoning. We dedicated our parks, and the next step would be to rezone them to PR. Is that in the works to be done?
There had been an effort, yes, and it's just a little bit on pause as we're getting some of our housing ordinances up to speed to address that issue, but yes, it's still in the works, and that'll be a 2019 initiative.
You expect it to be done next year?
Probably by the end, third or fourth quarter, starting it and revamping.
Huh. Interesting. Mr. Croft.
Mr. Falsey, throughout this budget, and here, I guess the last two in particular, it was noticeable to me that the request that we increase public safety, particularly the police, and decrease every other part of the budget results in these kind of things, a planning position left open or Mr. Schutte not having an assistant. How much longer is that a viable approach, and how do we know when we've hit the point where it's a no longer an appropriate way to budget?
I think we probably have hit it with this budget. I think at this point we have been looking at most of our departments being in a position of continuous cuts for nearly 9 years. And it was the first priority to regrow the police department to a size we felt was more appropriate for the community. I think we have achieved that. We're still down on the non-sworns. I think we would like to beef up the non-sworns. But I don't think that there is any more squeezing, material amounts of additional squeezing to be done in all the rest of the departments. And that's why you see in this world of not infinite resources and having to make hard choices that we do things like propose a cut to the fire department that is a real service level cut, because there's just not enough to hold everybody harmless. I think we've reached the place now where this is about as close to the bone as you can get, or you probably are into the bone.
What other options do we have?
Well, the additional option that we potentially have is going to the voters for some sort of additional authorization to find more resources.
Thank you.
Mr. Peterson and Mr. Peterson, Mr. Trainee, Mr. Dyson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've heard from the builders, contractors for several years that they say planning in the permit center is rather slow in coming up with the permits. And they've suggested that we need to hire someone else with more specific types of expertise to expedite permits through the center. What do you think about that idea? And since we're getting fewer applications for permits, are we getting them out faster this year?
So, Mr. Chairman, I'll jump in on that one. It's just because I think poor Mr. McNulty's kind of been unfairly in the crosshairs here. Generically speaking, people refer to everybody in that building as being in the planning department, and it's not entirely fair or accurate. And typically, the constituents you just referred to are referring to building safety side and not the planning side. Planning processes that we administer, entitlement processes, do take a long time, but that's not typically what you're hearing about from that particular group. That being said, as Mr. Falsey stated, Mr. Croft was asking about, there is not much more that can be done in the current fiscal condition of the city to further grow and or improve wait times when you have to reduce your workforce. There are a lot of improvements that have been made in the past 3 years on certain processes that are making that easier, and there are more to come. But at the end of the day, when it comes to having enough bodies to do things in a timely fashion, that unfortunately is the thing that we try to balance when we put these budgets together. If we're going to have a negative impact on our constituents, we try to avoid that, but in some cases it's unavoidable.
Ms. LaFrance, I'm sorry, I'm out of order here. I got Mr. Trainee, Mr. Dyson, Mr. Croft, then Ms. LaFrance, and then let's try to move on.
Eric, when you look at this budget, you brought up the point, there's a problem with it, because we're cutting bones out now, and we've been doing this for so many years, we can't keep doing it. The public says, reduce the cost of government. When we start to cut programs that they count on, they're gonna be saying, why don't you guys take care of it? So it's up to this body to see how we can get more money by going to the public and ask them, what type of town do you want to live in? Those are the ones that are going to have to have the burden of an increase in taxation. There is no way to invent money for this city. They've done a good job with it. But what I'm seeing with this budget is significant reductions. When we start cutting the fire department, a tender, that's real life, and people that require that service out in the field. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Dyson.
Yeah, sorry, I'm ready to zone you out, but Mr. Trainee keeps saying you.
That's why I haven't seen him on the zone you out too, Fred.
I'm not clever enough to come up with that pun. But Mr. Trainee keeps talking about the building official position is vacant. Right? Is that true? Anyways, Mr. Trainee seems to think that's really important.
Mr. Dyson, that's actually in a different department. It's not in the planning department's budget. The building official, which is filled currently in an acting capacity, sits in the Development Services Department. It's a budget I think we're getting to here shortly.
Forgive me for being out of order.
No worries. Mr. Croft.
No.
I mean, Mr. Constant is the second time. Mr. Constant and Ms. LaFrance.
Mr. Dyson just hit on what I was going to hit on, that I think you're intimating the conversation that the builders are asking for the building official, and that I know I saw that position advertised recently, and so I was going to seek an update, which is fine to hear it when we get to that point.
Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That was my question as well.
Great.
Building official.
We are moving forward. Real estate.
Okay, so this is Mr. Ward's department, and I think we're basically out of the $7.8 million that Ms. Ward has, it's basically all lease payments. And with those lease payments, there is some increases on the lease payments, and they include a variety of leases that we have. So about $77,000 increase to adjust for those include this building, parking garages, permit center, and other lease properties that we have. So that would up the amount of budget to take care of those leases per their contract. Other than that, our personnel is staying the same. Everything else is, there's no change.
Any questions? No. Moving on.
Parks and Recreation. So the next department, Parks and Recreation. So in Mr. Rada's department here, what we've done in the 2018 one time, they had a reduction in the curling club, but we reduced it for one time in 18. Since it was a one time, it's been added back in 2019. We have Ben Boki, Dempsey, Ice Arena operating losses. We supplemented that with 188,000, and then we also had some one-time money for the park foremen and caretakers for 175,000. So those were one-time adds. And then we made some adjustments for their bonds, adjustments for salaries, and then this is the balance of the one-time add to the budget for housing and homelessness. This happens to be for cleanup, camp cleanup. We just camp cleanup for $150,000, and then we added some money for the bonds. Mr. Rada, for your benefit, I mentioned that in the early part of part one that we were looking at some options on how you might allocate that 150 that would be able to maybe start your cleanup process a little bit earlier, maybe go a little bit longer. So while you're still working on that, that's something that they're looking to do. And then I think on their operating side, that's summary on the operating, at least for the changes, Mr. Chairman.
So I have a question to Mr. Train. This is something I just thought of. So we were talking earlier about how sometimes certain operating costs can be built into bonds. Is that right?
Yes.
So, for example, road maintenance, for example. Have we thought about the fact that perhaps uniquely in our city that homeless camp cleanup is a part of park maintenance?
We thought of it that way.
Perhaps it could be.
You're talking about adding M&O increment on top of a parks bond.
Yep.
It would have to be a new parks capital asset that then had an M&O cost associated with it.
Right.
So you're just trying to clean up the existing Chester Creek. There's no M&O bump for not adding to Chester
No, I
Creek.
know, but I mean, we're about to go to the CIB where we have quite a lot of new park facilities. Perhaps we, in the future, should think about the fact that one of our costs of maintenance to our new park facilities is the fact that we have to clean out a lot of refuse every summer.
Or, Karen, on that stuff, and John's here, or more generally putting the maintenance of the parks, including that cost, in parks bonds. Do we already, like road maintenance, put?
Yes.
Yep.
We
So-
just don't do that increment that he's talking about of camp cleanup.
Right. So, I mean, we have a $750,000 bond for a trail rehabilitation and wayfinding along Campbell Creek. We know that there are a number of camps along Campbell Creek that make it feel unsafe for a lot of people to use that facility.
So typically when we add O&M, it is to a brand new park or to a brand new road, or if we're expanding a park or expanding a road.
Yeah.
Just because we are rehabbing a trail or repaving a road, we don't automatically add O&M because we're paying for the existing facility. It's only when we expand it or upgrade it do we have the ability to add O&M. Traditionally, that's what we've done.
Okay. Mr. Trainee?
John, what will 150,000 get our residents as far as homeless cleanup? What does that entail? How many months are we talking about, and where would you start with it?
We estimate that we'll commit to 7 positions in a 6-month focused cleanup effort. And depending on what we see as a traditional weather pattern, which is not traditional anymore, so we'd be inclined to think of something that looks like late April, 1 May, continuing to late October, 1 November.
Because all our meetings, the main thing people are complaining about is all the homeless camps. My phone, my email every day, we've got homeless camp here and homeless camp there. When are you gonna start to clean it up? And you don't have the money to do it, not the personnel to do it anymore. So I don't think 150,000 is enough to get the job done. How much more money do you think we need if we wanted this to happen during the winter months? How much more money do you need to actually attack this issue?
That's a tough question to answer because winter will be whatever it is, and you still have to be able to do this safely, which means engage with the homeless community as well as enter the camps without putting both the people in the camps as well as the personnel at risk. You don't honestly know what you're walking into with snow cover and things like that.
So basically, where we shut down cleaning the homeless camps
No,
up?
we don't shut down completely because there are areas that we can access, and we tried to do that last winter specifically. If you recall, there were a couple of major DOT areas that they requested assistance with. O'Malley and Old Seward is one, a very large camp, one at the Clover Reef, Minnesota, and International. We've had others since. So if we can get in with the resources we have, which is predominantly now community work service, or with our weekend crews, we will attempt to do so. But the large built-in compounds are very difficult to try to get into in the winter months.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Peterson and Mr. Constant.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So go back to the O&M question. So if we're bringing in phase 2 of Chasnu Muldoon Park, could we include some operation and maintenance money in the budget for future years for that? Or how does the operation and maintenance get done?
That would be a reasonable assumption to make because it's going to be an expanded footprint into the heart of that dense area with new elements and features that will require maintenance.
Okay.
It will also bring more interactions between the public and the homeless individuals that are currently living in that park. Mr. Constant.
Thanks. So the confounding variable, and I wish she were here to speak to this, that provides the challenge. It's not necessarily all the money you have to do all the cleaning you can, because the circuit law or the federal court law states we have to house people if we're going to move them, or we have to provide them a meaningful alternative.
Took a decision out of Idaho.
Right, and so, but all of the movements of the Ninth Circuit over the last 10 years. So the point of that is that both facets have to be addressed in simultaneous fashion, housing and cleanup, because you can clean up to a point and then you literally get stopped because you don't have the mechanism to move forward with clearing them out because there's nowhere to put them. And so the conversation of aggressive cleanup has to be tied with where are we taking people? Because while the public continues to shout, I don't care where they go, they can't be here, we have the other side of the equation we have to deal with. And so I'm happy and very supportive of adding more money to cleanup and abatement issues, but we have to be super cognizant of tying additional funding to housing and support. Otherwise, the system breaks.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Ms. Browse, did you want to say something?
I just wanted to add to what Mr. Constant was saying and what Mr. Trainee was asking about. The amount of money that was added in the 2018 budget allowed for a 179% increase in the number of camps abated by APD and a 57% increase in the tonnage collected by Parks and Rec. So to Mr. Constant's point, we could add more money and more money specifically to camp abatement and cleanup, but in until there is that extra piece that solves the housing problem of the homelessness issue, we're just moving around inside the pot.
Thank you, Ms. Browse. Okay, any other questions on this? Let's move on to the capital budget of the park.
On the capital side, in summary, Mr. Rada can expound on these things, but Campbell Creek, the trail, we have a project that it's an ongoing process where they're improving the trail and parts of the trail over time. And then they have some improvements at the Chester Creek Complex down in the stadium area. Midtown Petty Park, I believe there's some matching funds that will be used for that. And then the parks improvements, there's parking lot improvements, playground improvements, inclusive playground additions. The Northeast Connector Trail, that one's sort of unique for Parks and Rec this year. That actually is going to match about $1.4 million of federal AMATS money. We provide some trail connections around outside of the Muldoon Curve area. And then, again, a variety of other park improvements. But to the Assembly member's point, we will look at and visit with parks if any of these are more than just replacing equipment or replacing what would already exist. If they are expansions or additions, we may have an opportunity to. We will add O&M as we have in the past.
So I have a question. Actually, so I want to ask that question too. That's actually a good one. So are we budgeting for maintenance of that trail for O&M?
For the
that newly constructed trail.
That would be
John for the Northeast Connector.
Yes.
Okay. And very pleased with that project. Huge support in the community. Thank you for that. I had a specific question on what are the ADA improvements in the Russian Jack Springs Park? Is there someone that could speak to that?
We have facility improvements that are necessary at the Celebrate Chalet.
Okay, it's at the chalet. Okay, and then okay, yeah, quickly, and then we'll go to Mr.
On the trail connector question, it seems now as a kind of emerging perspective that we have a lot of trails, and the trails seem to be the places where the camps go, and so I think there's a very logical connection between operations and maintenance that would fund cleanup around trail systems. And so it might be, if we investigate that is a good idea, that we actually build that into the default funding functions for any trail expansions in the future. Otherwise, people are going to start saying, no more trails. You know, so this is a really wise thing to contemplate at the planning level.
Mr. Trainee.
Thank you. John, on Campbell Creek, have we addressed the issue, and I asked somebody last time to look at the bike cross pathing at 47th and Lake Otis? That's into this. Have you guys looked at that?
Yes, that is in fact underway. We expect to report back fairly soon.
So I'd like to try and get that in the AMATS program. Because if we do a crossing over Lake Otis, that's going to require substantial money. You have to buy property out to put it across. I don't see under the road working with Campbell Creek being right there will flood. And it's not safe. Right now, every night when I go on Lake Otis, 47th, there are people, there are bikes, looking to see if they can scoot between the traffic. And the first time they have a kid killed there, they may ask us, why didn't you guys take care of it? So I appreciate any other reports that we get. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Mrs. LaFrance and then Mrs. Quinn-Davidson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Quick question on the security cameras, which look to be in Eagle River, Chubiak area. What are those for, or are they part of an ongoing project?
Because it's a necessity.
Like at a park?
Getting vandalized. People were breaking through our maintenance pens, or cutting the fence, or getting in the back of the vehicles. We lost all the equipment in 6 of our park maintenance trucks over in Mountain View about 2 months ago. They come in through the side, can't see them. They've got everything in the back end. They just took every power tool that was cable locked in to the backs of all the trucks inside the fence and the locked compound, and everything was locked.
Wow.
quick follow-up?
Yeah.
So then are there other locations, Mr. Rada, where you would want to have security cameras as well?
We're in the process of actually installing some as we go and as we can afford. So yes, we do have quite a list.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Wilbur wants to respond to that perhaps, and then we'll go to Ms. Quinn Davidson as a question.
Davidson first, please.
I think I might be answering my own question, but I was going to ask if, when it says other and there are all these numbers, you could provide notes that say where that funding source is, but I'm looking in the binder and realize that if you look here, it's there. Do we have the same point, Lance?
We do. I was just going to point that out because it is different in this case. Because the other is Parks and Rec service area in Chudiak Eagle River. They assess themselves in there, so it comes from how
Can't
they.
bombard our money.
Oh,
So it comes from Chudiak Eagle River residents.
I was trying to make you laugh.
support that. So, excellent choice.
Yeah, if I may, I should address, because I'm glad you brought that up. One piece, Lance, that you brought up, the AO that, in both the operating and capital budget side, does the Chudiak Eagle River Parks and Recreation Service Area is built within the entirety of the budget. We have to make an adjustment based on assessed valuations, distribution, and the AO that's been submitted, which comes up on Tuesday, I believe. Will be a recommendation that we modify the AO 2014, which Assemblymember Starr had put in, which allows us the flexibility to set our operating and capital within the needs of our service area. And we've already pre-established what that range is. So in this particular case, you won't see it on the operating side, but you will see it in the other, because our capital funds, as originally projected, will affect how this other list looks when the budget is approved. We make that internal decision in our community with our Parks and Rec board.
So since we submitted the budget to you, the Parks and Rec Commission out of Eagle River, they want to make some adjustments on how they use their money. And if the Assembly passes that, then in effect affects what we had proposed. So we can make an adjustment, assuming the Assembly supports that ordinance. And it's, and Mr. Rod's right, but that's why there's a difference.
Okay. All right. Any other questions on this slide? No? Let's move on to development services.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Liz. So, development services. So in the development services department, about $11 million budget. They had some one-time money, the $200,000 for code abatement, and I know that they've been doing a lot of work in that arena. So the administration, based on how this $200,000 turns out through the end of the year and after the end of the year, if they have any money left over, the administration will be looking to probably roll the balance of that into 2019 as the program continues. So we don't know how much money that is, but that's something that we're thinking about right now. Their salary adjustments, and then while we weren't able to add $200,000 into 19, we did add $100,000 at least as the part of the proposed budget as we start off 2019. So that's the primary changes between the development services and from 18 to 19. And I have one more thing to mention is that the administration is looking at making some adjustments in the fees for development services, a little bit for planning and for the fire department. That will be coming to you as an omnibus, either probably on the 7th or action on the 20th. But there were some adjustments in the fees from development services and the fire department, but I'll point that out here. I know you had some questions about the building official, but I'll let you fire away.
Well, before we get to that, I just want to say I think a number of my colleagues share the feeling this $200,000 is money that's very well spent. I know it's been, I'm not sure if this has been directly connected to what happened to Airport Heights as well, but I know there's been some work done there, and of course the large cleanup in South Anchorage. I'm wondering if there's any chance that this will sort of generate some funds as well to offset some of these costs as we start to foreclose on or otherwise sanction some of these properties? I'm seeing some nodding from Mr. Falsey.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, the whole program is designed to at some point become self-sustaining, and you've identified one of the ways in which that's possible. As this abatement work continues, there are properties that will go through the foreclosure process, at which point we'll be able to dispose of them and replenish the fund. Ideally, it would become entirely, sort of a self-sustained fund.
Great.
And that's part of the reason why we felt justified in the lower amount in 19 versus 18 is we got one of the biggest ones, most expensive ones off the list. And moving ahead, we look at creating that self-sustaining momentum.
Great. Okay. Any other questions on this? The building official, for example? Did that already get answered to people's satisfaction? So there's some questions about, you remember during our planning discussion, there were questions that were more appropriate for development services. Ms. LaFrance?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Chris, would you discuss a little or describe the issue with the building official? I know we talked about before how it's filled now, and you can, for a permanent candidate, you can now look to someone with an architectural background as well as engineering, but there's still the issue of being able to find someone who would work for something less than a competitive wage in the industry. I mean, are those still issues? It seems like from what we're hearing, it's not been resolved.
Well, I think you just answered your own question
Okay.
by describing that scenario. That's exactly, with the exception of the wages, I do think that municipal employees do certainly typically get paid less than private sector counterparts, but there, of course, are offsetting benefits of working for this organization. In particular, in the challenge of filling on a permanent basis the building official position, which also acts as the de facto department director. I have been fortunate to have the support of Jack Frost, who's here somewhere. Jack's back there. We have bifurcated the responsibilities that typically fall into one person. So Jack has stepped up and is fulfilling the duties that are requested of a department director, which is sometimes a lot of mundane tasks that can slow someone down. Jack's been great at handling all of the department director responsibilities. We have an individual serving as an acting building official going on a year and a half now. And that individual solely focuses on the adjudication side of what that job requires. So if you've got an issue or conflict or misinterpretation of code or other issues like that, that individual, that's all they deal with. And so what we've done by doing that is we've tried to ensure that there is no disruption in service, so that as issues come up that require adjudication, there is somebody that can quickly and easily respond to it. And then conversely, we've tried to lighten that individual's load by offsetting some of the department director responsibilities, Jack. But you also pointed out Mr. Constant pointed out the position has been continuously listed. One of the things that we have done is expand the qualifying skill set to beyond just engineering, offensive engineers, that we other people do. And so we're hopeful that will generate some interest.
Great. Other questions for development services?
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
One other question?
Yeah, of course.
So for the Fund 181, what's the plan for restoring that?
So the 181 fund, which does operate in a deficit, is only part of this department's story. Development Services does receive fees from both 181 fund sources as well as general government sources. And Lance spoke to that a little bit ago. You will see an omnibus 101 fund fee increase ordinance. In other words, services that fall under general government for traffic, fire, planning, and development services based on the CPI. On the 181 side, we have continued to support the functions of that department that would not typically be funded because of the deficit in 181. And we intend to continue to do that because it's more important to deliver the service, we feel, than to unfairly hamstring the department. As budget surpluses come, and we have committed this to that constituency who cares most about this, as surpluses come, we look at restoring the 101 funds that were transferred out of 181 back into 181 and restoring that fund to balance.
Well, we all look forward to those surpluses. Any other comments on development services? Okay, let's go on to the library.
All right, Mr. Chairman, on the library, we have a little bit of adjustment. They had in 2018, we took a one-time materials reduction, and so this year we've added that back in to 2019, and then during the first quarter revisions, the Assembly added $125,000 for supporting services primarily on Sunday. And then we did a roll on their their salaries. And in 2019, we are adding about $223,000 to their budget. Half of that, a little less than half of that, is to support the software and the maintenance for the automated handling system. And then again, about $123,000 that would support their service, continued service on Sundays, and with that, it has an addition of 4 positions in the library. So,
is the automation software maintenance that $100,000, is that a one-time thing, or is that something we can expect to continue year to year?
It's annual, sir.
Okay. Any other questions on the library operating budget? Mr. Constant?
Thank you. So I was hearing rumors from one of my councils that there were intended cuts to staffing at some of the branch libraries. Are you anticipating some of those branches having fewer staff in order to keep staffing, or can I continue assuring them that's not what's happening?
No, that isn't what's happening with the reinstatement of, without the budget reduction and reinstatement for Sunday hours.
Thank you.
Great.
And
Any other?
Just clarify the 100,000, it's not just for automated handling. We have self-check machines in every single library and other software. You know, those usually go up 2 to 3%, so it's all of those.
Okay. Okay. Other questions on the operating budget for the library? All right. Let's go on to the capital budget.
on the capital side, primarily they have in the bonds, again, this would be part of an area-wide bond. The biggest piece, there's a little bit of money for the Birdwood Library, and then to replace the 4 elevators in Moosac that were not replaced as part of the renovation. So that would be part of that $950, and then some money for some safety upgrades out in Mountain View. And I know that the library and the board is interested in trying to find a location and potentially opportunity to create a downtown library, so they have a state request in for 19 as well.
Great, and in that case, is that one that actually might happen? Because there is a large, was it $7 million in the private fund that is available if we can find that? Is that correct?
That's correct.
Is it more than that?
You're basically correct. There was a trust set up, and there is an amount that Mary Jo and her staff have identified as being the seed capital to create a self-sustaining spin-off. And so we're a little bit short, $2 million towards what I recall, to hit that sweet spot where we have full-on operating costs for downtown branch sustained by that payout.
You ignored my idea to purchase that Matsu Ferry, then ground it and put a library inside it. But, you know, I thought that would have been cool. That's right. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And as long as we're talking about new libraries, we are actually renting a facility in Muldoon for our library. What are the long-term plans to build a standalone building for a library in East Anchorage?
We would love to have a different facility. That facility arose really we had to get out of another state. So we are in talking stages only with the Inlet Housing Authority as one option, and that would be a co-located building with perhaps, again, we're only talking about it with the Stream Charter Academy and perhaps the Fab Lab, a part of Cook Inlet Tribal Council.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Trainee.
Have we looked at restoring the Diamond Mall Library?
We would love to restore the Diamond Hall Library. One of our board members talked, or some location in the south end. We recently did a questionnaire from the public, out of 1,600 people, and people continue to hammer away at where is the south end library. So the owner is willing to lease us space again.
The owner's willing to give you the space, Matt.
Pardon me? Well,
The owner, Hugh Ashlock, is willing to give you the space.
Okay.
That was not a problem when Sullivan shut it down. And it's still not a problem.
that's what the Senate
It's
told
O&M
us.
costs.
Yeah.
Because
We'd love
I've
that.
talked to you. He's willing to give you that location. Just need to know how much, if you have O&M costs to staff it.
We don't have enough staff to add another facility. There would be additional operating costs.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Any other questions on the library capital budget? Okay, let's continue.
Another question, comment to the administration. I want to say thank you for holding the library harmless in this budget. Keeps me from having to jump up and down. Thank you.
You get to jump more, don't worry.
You'll find something.
No, I know. You hear that, y'all? Dick has plans.
So we sort of miraculously got back on schedule, and we have a 5-minute break. So let's take it.
Real 5-minute break?
Sure, Mr. Haberman. A real 5-minute break. Here. 2:06.
I have to, of course, I gotta go to work, so.
How we doing, Eugene?
You're on the radio, or what?
You certainly can.
Whereabouts?
It may make the sense explode, but you can listen.
Will it make him jump up and down?
Not usually. I really try hard not to talk about my coworkers.
Yep.
I don't always succeed, but.
You know, it's okay. It'll come back around. It'll come back around with Margaret.
Jeff's interview with you.
Oh, yeah.
That was
fun.
good. I like that.
That was fun.
It's not
We got
lost.
to talk about Chris, but it was all positive. I think we did say we were all extremely.
Well, that's usually my word. Yeah, people call me a right winger, so I don't take offense.
No, RWNJ.
It's just
Amy,
if I am, that's not my intent.
Amy.
Right wing nutshell.
Yeah.
Jeez. We're still all on the record.
Well, when you're running process and you're politics, people like to vilify you can look at it. There is a corn. Yeah. Well, there's a lot of times, I laugh at your son because some of the issues, like I was probably doing
Friends now. It's just from Sandra trying to the street.
Gotta live in the boat if you're sewer.
Well, that's why I say one of our biggest fights was about tennis courts, and you couldn't have kids moving to one side. I mean, it was a jungle race for everybody, and I was like, I was probably only on the bottom. It's probably my third meeting, maybe, and I was 5 on this side, 5 on this side, and I was like, yeah, and I ended up doing
That was
this.
your last chance.
I ended up taking this solution I wanted, but it took a lot of work, and it made everything I needed to
So the cooking and housing situation where there's residences above.
Actually, what we're looking at is, have you seen the new trail that we built over there?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that parcel is owned, that property is owned by.
I might call confusing.
Yeah, they built this. Now, Becker owns the corner parcel. They own the one they built the trail on. They donated the trail to us. They're looking at streaming that
It's a bigger head.
so that we can also benefit for the library, for the new Search Academy location. I'm really excited about it. So it wouldn't be have any council component of it. Yeah, help facilitate it. we need to figure out what each
You know, I've heard it, you know, and that's my point is,
what's the best
the more you do, sometimes you're
three
able
separate
to
buildings, so we do a single building,
Yeah, what's
condo it out, like, we own a school and town center, which is three separate condos. We don't know what the final deal will be, but we're really excited about that site, right there on the street.
Oh, yeah.
People. And then I personally haven't lost hope that Sorrento's property at the end of the bar will do.
Is it 10,000 square feet or something?
Yeah, it's more than that. It's perfectly sized for a library branch and for a Parks and Rec. It would make some parks, you know, so we can have
A little storage right there.
storage area.
is this part of your, I don't know what to tell you. I mean,
Very exciting. But not likely, his price is sky high.
But I guess he's very,
I gotta tell you, the dividend came out, my copy was just,
Yeah, that was, it is crazy.
Yeah.
you just got a plan, it's gonna take you probably 10 minutes a month to get anywhere.
Yeah, I don't know where it was. I was doing something basic. Like I had to go buy something, and I just forgot that.
I remember driving by the bank and the line was damn near out the door.
Oh, really?
Across the USA there. And
Yeah.
It's incredible. It's $300,000, like right for it's a great example of how basic connection really works pretty well. People talk about, oh, they're buying all these luxuries, but Yep, and it makes a huge amount of money for all of us.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but the universities did a study and they said the impact of the dividend was negligible. Negligible.
I don't know, yeah, the ICER study I saw.
They want to know how many jobs it created and they thought it was negligible. So,
Okay, let's do this thing. Well,
people are so mad about that.
all right, back in it.
Care means business.
All right, Mr. Chairman, we're on the home stretch. I think we've got about 7 or 8 more slides, and then wrap it up. So let's start off with the Chief Fiscal Officer, so Alex Slifka. He's got a department of 2. In Alex's team, it's really no changes as a result to what's going on in his shop. In personnel, there's no changes going on. I think, unless you have any questions specifically for Alex and the admin assistant. Other than that, let's move on to finance. So the finance department is actually similar to Mr. Falsey's department. It's comprised of a bunch of different elements. Inside the finance, we have the controller's office, the treasurer's office, property appraisal, and treasury. And so when we look at all of those departments and all of those reporting, we also report to Mr. Slifka. We had a couple adjustments. In 2018, we provided some one-time money for some support for the CAFR. We also had a temporary position to assist in the early stages of when we were overwhelmed with our payroll challenges early in the year. And then we also had some additional overtime that we added to them during that time in the payroll time when we were making some of those adjustments. And again, here's the reduction of payroll coming out of finance department to move into ER. And then some adjustments to the benefits remaining for all those personnel that are 90 personnel that are remaining inside the finance department. When you look down, some of the proposed reductions in support of how we're filling the gap that we had. The Treasury Department, they're going to charge a portion of their operational time to a capital project, the CAMA project that's underway. We bonded for, or not bonded for that, we've supported supported that last year through some capital efforts. And then the last one is a reduction of $350,000 in some labor efficiencies inside. It says in the controller's office, it could be the controller manages it in the other place. I couldn't tell you exactly which positions or when they will be. I'll let Mr. Stick speak to it, but I don't know if we've actually got that far down since he's new, sort of learning what's going on around there. But that's proposed from the finance side of the house.
Is there someone here from the controller's office?
I'm happy to answer questions about it. Tammy is here.
Could you explain a little bit more what that means, reduce labor for efficiencies?
Well, like to the chair, I'd rather answer that. So it would be obvious to everybody that the controller's office has dealt with a challenging system, which has obviously demonstrated a delay. As I've said a couple of times, I've now finished my first full week on the job. I'm going to spend the next several months down on the 5th floor, working through with them. They have many issues in terms of fully integrating SAP. They're doing a lot of error correction that can be dealt with a concentrated focus between IT and the controller's office on processes and what's getting done. Our goal is by the end of the year, we will meet this target, but Lance is correct. At this point in time, we haven't specifically identified anybody, but we are working toward making that department effective and efficient.
When you say reduce labor, you mean reduce hours, reduce people, reduce contractors?
It's probably a combination of all of those things. There's a lot of overtime being run right now just to try and get the CAFR done, things like that. And so it's possible it could end up with fewer people if we find out through a detailed examination that some of the work that's being done is not needed, if we can correct for all the errors, that they're having to spend all their time correcting and doing stuff outside of SAP. We get it fully integrated over the course of the next 4 or 5 months. I expect that we'll find the opportunities to save this money.
Okay, Mr. Constant.
When you said you expect to be clear by the end of the year, did you mean by the end of 2019 or the end of 2018?
At the end of 2019, we will have achieved this target.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions on this, on the finance operating?
Can I ask one?
Yeah. Go ahead, David.
I might have missed this because I went to the restroom. Sorry, Mr. Haberman's going to get excited about that. But the CAFR, is that coming back in for 20? Like, how are you going to do the next one?
So I think what Lance referred to is there was some extra money applied this year due to the fact that it's October and we're still finalizing what should have been done several months ago.
Okay.
So we anticipate next year not having.
So I know that recently you were, someone in the administration we were spoken to about that you were able to find a number of misused property tax exemptions. Does that fall in here, or what's the department that was able to find those?
Yeah, it falls in here. But Dan, you want to talk about that a little bit?
Property appraisal, Jack's here, but their group does the audit. They find where exemptions have not been received but not qualified for it.
Yeah.
And so as a result of that, Treasury does the billing, and any money that comes in from those bills is reported as revenue in the year it's received. So most of that is, there's about $500,000 this year. There will be some of that next year, very likely, but I don't think we specifically budgeted for that. But that actually may help in some ways with this budget.
And that can be, I'll get to you in a second, Mr. Constant, to follow up. That can be allocated back to property appraisal or to maybe the finance more generally. And the reason I'm asking that is because we've seen, like on the federal level, for example, a systematic underfunding of the IRS. And what that leads to is an inability to actually enforce some laws, and then ultimately less revenue. So you're shooting yourself in the foot. And I want to make sure that we're not doing that with property appraisal.
We are not doing that. Let me give the opportunity to Jack Legislative. So if you haven't met him, Jack Kademas is the head of property appraisal. And, you're welcome. Thank you. And I'll just
highlight for you, one of the things we are focused on is there's a number of senior appraisers who are going to be retiring. We're going to be filling those shoes the best we can. But obviously between the two of them, Jack and Dan, that's the bulk of the community's revenue. So we are completely focused on making sure that they can do their job.
Okay, Mr. Constant and
Thanks.
Mr. Trainee.
Yeah, sidebar from yesterday's meeting. I guess, Jack, you're the one that might have heard about this. I had a constituent outreach concern that they were a senior citizen who went into an assisted living home. Their family's trying to sell the property, but now they're getting hit with the non-resident penalty for not actually being in their home as a senior citizen. Have you heard about this from the administration yet?
I heard a brief, a little bit yesterday as far as the trickle down of this particular example or this particular individual. I don't know the name or anything, but I can speak more in general terms that yes, we are conducting a review of all the exemptions. It's something that is within the municipal code. And we take very great pride and caution when we're removing these exemptions. But at the end of the day, if they haven't lived in the house for 185 days, we follow the code and we remove that exemption. So we try to be as non-biased as we can.
So that's fine. I'll stop there and just say you'll expect to hear from me and a number of other people here in the near term, and maybe a code change. So thank you.
Yeah, I think a grace period of some kind makes sense. Are you? So 185 days, and you go back to the beginning, or that 185 days they have that time period in which to sell the home, for example.
So in a calendar year, they must live in the house for 185 days.
Or it goes back to the beginning, and the exemption did not apply for that entire year.
Yeah, so it's a calendar year.
Right. Yeah, that's I could see we need a code change, perhaps. All right. So I'm sorry, Mr. Trainee.
We have a lot of not-for-profit organizations in Anchorage that are tax exempt. And we've been requested by the Budget Advisory Commission to look at the stats of every one of them, to make sure they still qualify for that exemption. Are you guys doing that?
We do on an annual basis look at all properties. That being said, we also we have a large amount of exemptions. I don't know off the top of my head how many nonprofit exemptions we have. I know it's about for residential senior exemptions, we're about 40,000, I believe. Don't quote me on it, it's a rough number. So there's a lot of work that really is done on these exemptions.
You'll probably hear from our Budget Advisory Commission because this is something we've been working on for years.
Okay.
And I would like to see some movement on this. Appreciate it. Thank you. Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Mr. Slifka?
A few notes that go back to your prior comments. Cynthia Weed, our bond counsel, is here. I had a chance to talk to her very specifically. The GIS question, yes, you can capitalize that asset. The question about can you, in a bond offering, capitalize maintenance of a trail to address homelessness, her answer is no.
All right. Let's see.
Good idea, though.
Well, she said trail. She didn't say park.
Generally, she said.
Did you hear that? Praise of my dick, a forest? I like that.
There you go. Okay, so any other questions on finance operating? If not, let's move on to purchasing.
All right, so Ron Hatton's team, there's really no change here. We do know that we ask departments if they have individuals who have a substantial amount of leave in the bank and they're going to cash it out, or when we expect them to retire. In this particular case, they have the opportunity to submit a request for a one-time hit for a leave cash out for an employee. In this case, and one employee has at least $40,000 in leave and they plan to retire. I can tell you from previous experience, as a director in another department, I got $85,000 of cash out leave and I had to absorb it in my budget. It's a pretty painful process, particularly when there's surprises. So I think this is the one adjustment for Mr. Hadley's team.
Tell SAP not to recognize.
Mr. Constant.
That's one person?
That's one.
Dang.
So don't a lot of companies and negotiated contracts have a deal where you're only allowed to accrue so much leave?
So it's not a matter of the amount that they're accruing, it's the fact that they're not taking it.
No, I understand that, but at some point, a lot of
Use it or
companies,
lose it.
at a certain point, 200 hours, 500 hours, you can no longer accrue anymore. It just evaporates. So yes, use it or lose it.
Right. I have to talk to Karen about the rules, particularly in this particular case, because it's different for every individual, and I think this individual is a non-represented employee. But I think 480 hours is the max that you can carry, but I'll have to check, Mr. Johnson.
I can provide. On this particular employee, he's a 15-year employee. He has 283 hours of cashable sick leave because before the rules changed, he was able to do that. And then he has at least 480 hours of leave that he's probably going to roll over. So if he were to retire at the end of December, with his salary would be about $38,000 as it stands today. What it's going to be in May, he's thinking about retiring. I don't have a better crystal ball than approximately.
Shocking number.
760 hours of leave. Well done by that guy. All right. Any other comments on this? Comments or questions on this? Okay. IT.
IT. So I think most of, I'll just summarize on her budget, but I think Ms. Marshall has briefed the Assembly monthly. But what's going on here, 2018, we had a one-time write-off for the Chronos clocks, because we were not using the Chronos clocks anymore. We switched our timekeeping process. And then from salary adjustments, as Ms. Marshall mentioned, she's made some adjustments inside her personnel. The net change of that is about almost a $28,000 reduction in her labor. One of the things that she had proposed and we accepted was some reduction in our professional services, some contracting budget. We challenged all the departments to propose reductions, and this is one that was proposed. On the other hand, we are going to make some increases in depreciation for capital projects, so that is, our position count will go up by a couple. And then, as I mentioned earlier, on the opening couple slides, part one, the depreciation for the software and technology is housed inside IT, and primarily most of that is all for SAP depreciation. So this budget reflects the work that she is doing and is presented to the Assembly as she's making changes in 2018, move some personnel around, reducing the contracts to support personnel, keeping some contract folks in place, and that reorganization chart that she showed you. So she's working on that in 18. This will carry that forward through complete implementation in 19. So that's IT's operating.
Okay. Any questions on IT?
Operating.
What's that? Yeah, the operating budget for IT.
Yeah, quick
The
question.
capital 2. Yep.
Susie, we've heard, or I've heard reports of a plan to update or begin the process of updating our website. Can you give us a brief on what we can expect to happen in 2019?
2019, right now we are finalizing a platform upgrade. This is a SharePoint platform, and it was a 2003 server, 2005, I think, SharePoint. So we're upgrading what it currently looks like and making sure it works on the new platform. And that should be done by the end of the year. And then we will look at how we want to, as a company, if we want to change the look and feel of it in 2019. The project, I know people have strong feelings about that, but we'll make sure that's about all I have.
Okay, so a review of the platform and upgrades to this underlying system, and then a decision on what to do in 2019.
If it'll look different, yeah.
Okay.
If we want a different review.
Thank you.
Mr. Weddleton?
many years ago, there was a very good system that would notify us of planning issues that happened. Like if there's a rezone, I get an email, and or whatever, a replat. That people, community council type people, really get excited about that stuff. And then it switched to a new system that was horrible and cumbersome and skidded. And then it went to 0.
Okay.
So is that your department or is this the planning department?
That would probably be.
That's us.
That's you guys doing that. Oh, you guys manage that?
Yeah.
Okay. I
Planning.
guess we can help you.
It's called the City View portal.
Okay.
That's City View, does it? Oh, okay.
And sorry to
Yeah, go ahead.
chime in. There was a system change, and part of the problem, similar to Littleton, is that a lot of the people who relied on the previous system had to re-sign up their email address, and so people felt like the system was broken, but really it was a strange glitch where the previous email addresses had to be manually re-added back in by folks. But it is stood up, and zoning notices or entitlement notices still go out to people who sign up for them, and you can select either your community council or multiple parts of town you care about, etc. And you can get your inbox flooded anytime.
I've been trying.
Service we provide. Mr. Constant.
Just to put a little bit of perspective on what I'm hoping to see, and this may or may not be this year, 2019 or whatever, but and I had a discussion about the possibility of an app, and I understand that that's not really feasible because of maintenance costs, but a website that's compliant with modern technology that will allow individuals like Mr. Haberman to click on any number of boxes on whatever it is that interests him in the city business, whether it's assembly agendas, committee agendas, planning and zoning actions, anything, and be updated consistently and regularly when a new agenda or a meeting or other items are published. It seems like if we can create a portal on which city government becomes accessible to people where they're at, then we have a better and more functional government. And so that's the conversation we're having, and I anticipate then that that's maybe 2020 and beyond. But in 2019, we might be able to get to how we could proceed in the direction of achieving that kind of accessibility of government to the citizenry.
Okay. All right. Any other questions on IT operating? Let's proceed.
Moving on to capital. So the proposal for the capital projects for IT, many of these are the same as you've seen in the past. Basically hardware, software improvements, some desktop support, and our improvements a little bit for the phones, and then again, SAP infrastructure development. So it's basically the same, similar types of improvements that they've had in the past. And again, to Assemblymember LaFrance's point, what happens is that like their operating budget, these resources would be bought and then paid for with property tax money, and then we come to the assembly when we do this by and get your appropriations when we do it all at once. So if you have questions on particular projects, I think Ms. Marshall can address those. But that's their proposal for the capital program for 19.
Ms. LaFrance, and then Mr. Trainee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So for the $350K for SAP, that's not on the budget overview we had yesterday under capital.
Right, you're right, I'm sorry about that. That was because I wasn't thinking about the capital. This is, if our evaluation of the HEC hosting environment results in, hey, we really need to host this on-prem, we think it will. So that's why we put the 350, but we really are going to go through an exercise and determine if it's going to or not. So yes, you're right. I'm sorry on that. I forgot about the capital request.
Thanks.
On the budget. Yep.
Okay. Mr. Trainee.
Along the lines of that, does HEC require you to use their servers?
Yes.
So what you're looking at is pulling our server off of their server, like you're saying before, trying to host it somewhere in Anchorage.
Yes.
But will that affect the download of every other update to SAP?
No, actually, in the short-term gain that everybody is excited about, at least on our team, is that the performance for all employees should exponentially improve. Because we will be doing it in our intranet environment and not that's high speed, but it's only as good as how much we can afford.
How long did we sign up for it?
Sign up, it ends
Right.
officially, I think it's February
He was
20.
this visionary behind.
Thank you.
Yep.
I'd just like to note for the record, she described the internet as a tunnel.
A series of tubes.
Because we have a tunnel.
No, I know. I'm just saying,
Yeah, I
people
didn't-
made fun of him, but Uncle Ted was right.
I didn't say two.
Tunnel's a kind of tube. Mr. Constant.
Thanks. So, this is more of a philosophical question, I think, about SAP. You know, there was a vote when we first got on the body that was super horrifying. It was like a $5 million increase and raised the number to 82 point something million dollars of total expenditures. 85, yeah. And so, I'm not wanting to be lulled into a sense of complacency. Do we expect any shocking, or should we be expecting any shocking surprise, like, oh my God, here comes another $5 million we need to appropriate to make this one last time work? Or are we really in the kind of maintenance phase now where it's, in your opinion, close to functional and we're on the road?
I think the latter. We are definitely close. We are functional right now. We are. I mean, if there is some upgrade that suddenly has a price tag to it, instead of, we pay a annual maintenance fee, license maintenance fee, and that pays for upgrades that are available. So I can't say it'll never happen, but in the current, my understanding of the current pricing model is, I think we're good to go. And I think our challenge is that we just have to make sure we're staying on top of our upgrades and making sure we are doing all the patching and all the security stuff that we need to do. So I don't see a $5 million capital request in the near term at all.
So we have Ona in the queue for some expectation management.
I just wanted to piggyback on what Susie was saying. That doesn't mean that there's not ongoing operational costs.
There
I
it
know
is.
that
No, of course.
every piece of equipment that we ever purchase, so
Yeah.
there will be ERP maintenance, operating costs, and potential small capital investments every single year. We can't do much about whether or not SAP as a company decides to totally change their system and or discontinue support for various modules that we may have. And if that happens, we'll have to deal with that. I think that as people have, smartphones and everything changes over a 5-year period, at some point your technology may stop working. But for right now, what we see is just the ongoing HR support tax and other included upgrades that do not come with additional costs. Yeah.
Okay, Ms. Quinn Davidson, then Ms. LaFrance.
Lance, I think you talked about this, but can you remind me? So all of the other, then I look in the binder, and then it says the fund is IT fund. So that's just
So their fund
operating.
is, so they have a fund, it's in a separate fund, it's 602, I don't know the exact number.
607, 800.
Thank you very much, yes, 607, 800 it is. So we pay for it out of that fund, and that's how it's accounted for.
So how does that fund, what is that fund? Where does it come from? Why is it there?
Go ahead. I'm gonna ask Marilyn to help me out.
Through the chair, for capital funded projects in IT, we do borrow. We borrow what we call a master lease program. And so the fund 607, 800 is where the capital project spending is housed. The debt service goes to the operating fund. So you'll see the debt service for all these capital projects on the operating fund. And it's the IT's budget. And then IT's budget is funded by what we call IGCs, charges out to all the other departments that get service from IT. And then, of course, those departments are in service areas, and those service areas provide the tax dollars to pay for those department services that they receive.
Okay, so just, thank you. I'm sure a member of the public reading this would not understand what that means. So just a note about, I feel like I'm maybe the best person to speak to that, since this is my first time and I don't know what a lot of this means, but it would be helpful to have little footnotes just about these funds and what they are. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Going back to the topic of the managed expectations, so for SAP, so if we were to see any kind of like, if there were a series of, I don't know, massive defects or some kind of planned upgrade gone awry, we would see that under the operations consulting line, right?
Yes.
We wouldn't see that in capital because we're in a maintenance environment, right?
I agree.
So any upward pressure would, cause that consulting line to explode, theoretically,
Yeah,
right?
so that would be an operating.
Okay.
Yes. And
We won't see that happen.
Hopefully won't. Don't worry. Mr. Croft, do you have a question?
So, Ms. Grouse, if we took these capital IT items and the GIS that we looked at before and bonded for them instead of paying with cap tax dollars, we free up enough to put the fire station or fire tanker back in and do a lot of other stuff.
your math is correct, Mr. Cox, but I can't speak to whether or not those things are allowed to be included in bonds.
I think, if I could, Mr. Chair, I think you can't bond for a phone or desktop and for software maintenance upgrades, but there may be.
This phone system you couldn't, but some of the other hardware you could.
Yeah, you have to look to see what the detail is of what the purchase would be. We could look into that. But I think
Yeah, I'd
bond-
be curious which of these,
Okay.
Alex or whoever, a bond counsel, which of these are bonded?
Okay.
Mr. Welton and Mr. Trainee. Okay, Mr. Trainee.
Just I remember the Scotia tried years ago to bond for computers. They got killed by the public when it went out for voting. They said nobody can bond for a computer because bond are things that have 30-year lifespan or 20-year lifespan. Computers are obsolete the moment they hit the shelf. About 3 or 4 years and they're obsolete. So.
But in
Well,
this
they turned
case, the
that down.
public's really supportive of SAP, so.
You what? You what on SAP?
The public loves it, so.
Oh, yeah.
Mr. Welton.
Okay, so maybe I misheard something, but these funds come from that key bank loan, basically. So we don't really, and we paid that over a period of time. So it's similar to a bonding.
Yes.
So are we actually going, we're not going to pay $2.1 million next year. We're going to pay interest plus whatever.
So that's what I was just about to expand on to Mr. Croft's point, is that it wouldn't actually change our debt service for the amount of money under the tax cap that we're paying for this. What it could do is if you put it on a bond, that the voters could approve it outside of the tax cap, which would pop it up, but the repayment is the same, except to the extent that we tend to use 20-year bonding capacity on capital projects and for IT infrastructure. Because of the short life cycle, we use 5-year repayment terms on the capital purchases.
Okay. Mr. Constant, and then let's move forward.
So does that mean the $80 million that we took out on a loan? No, I guess not. The money that we took a loan for SAP is a 5-year debt.
So the structure the way it exists right now, if you take the 80 million roughly that we spent on it, we've got outright grants of, we'll say, 14 million. So we have 67 million that we actually borrowed over the time span. By the end of this year, that number will be, I believe, somewhere around 48 million. Actually still outstanding through a series of key bank loans. In other words, Susie was talking about $9 million roughly in SAP expense this year. That'll get added to that with a life cycle, and we've got other things that are coming due and maturing. So we sit right now roughly, we'll call it 50 million actually in debt relative to SAP.
But is that a 5-year or a 15-year?
It's got a various maturity, but it is currently in various shorter-term timeframes, we are not going to refinance that, which would just increase our expense. But
Yeah.
right now, the costs are actually as low as they can be.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, well, let's move on to the municipal attorney then.
All right, so, in Ms. Wynn Pearson's operations, basically the only change they have from their 18 to their 19, they have a little bit of salary adjustments for the 48 employees they have. They have a piece of software, it's called JustWare, as I understand it, upgraded. They want to do some upgrades on that, and so they need a little bit of extra support for some maintenance or some support for that software piece. So other than that, their personnel count is going to remain the same. Small adjustment to the budget for 19.
Okay, Mr. Trainee.
Becky, who's paying for Mark Mute right now? Are we paying for that cost or what?
That's a good
'Cause
question.
it was chief of police during that
Yeah.
time period. I don't know who's paying his bill.
Usually for his travel costs. I believe that in that case, he is a witness for Mr. Henry, which means that his counsel is paying. I can double check.
You double
Paul
check
may
for
be
me,
able to
'cause
confirm
I don't
for
think
me.
anybody's paying for his time.
Yeah, we're not paying for his time, but it would be his travel and lodging expenses for
I
him
just want
as
to
a
know anything
witness.
the city's on the hook for relative to indemnify.
Yeah, certainly I can pull that.
Thank you, ma'am.
I hope you're not suggesting that we mess with the budget on that item.
That also is not my
you
budget,
would be
that's
surprised what
APD's
I'm
budget.
suggesting.
Speak with
I
Chief
changed the
Dahl
law
about
after that
that.
incident happened. You don't suspend a chief of police for 2 weeks and not bother to tell the body who approves them, which was us. We changed the law, Mr. Chairman.
It's true. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So are we hiring outside counsel for that case, or are we working that in-house?
In that case, we were represented by Littler Mendelsohn, by an outside counsel firm, and how we have been since 2015. It sort of follows our standard practice that when we are that level of complex litigation, we just simply don't have the attorneys and staff support to be able to do that level of discovery and that level of litigation in-house. So it follows our standard protocol. We've been represented there again by outside counsel from the beginning.
Okay, and if I can follow up on that a minute, so do we budget enough to finish that case, or are we going to have to supplement that later?
We were discussing that this week. I believe that we will need to submit an additional request for appropriation this year for the remaining attorney's fees. Again, that does come out of APD's budget, not the municipal attorney's budget, because we bill outside attorney costs to the department represented. But I believe you should expect to see a request for an increase in contract authority to cover the cost of this fall's trial.
Thank you.
Mr. Trainee.
If in fact we prevail, then we'll recover damages. That's a decision of the court. Or is it just free pass on this?
We will not recover damages, unfortunately, against Mr. Henry. So.
Why? Because we don't want to go after him because of no assets.
No. Well, he's sued us on the grounds of unlawful discharge. I think we could seek to recoup attorney's fees if we are because it's not a constitutional case, and if a constitutional case we don't receive attorney's fees in federal court.
We're in federal court,
Yeah.
so we're not in the usual state attorney fee.
Yeah, we have it's not as generous as state court in terms of being able to recoup attorney's fees.
If there's anything at all to recover, please, as long as I'm on this helmet, I'd pursue. You
Whatever we can do.
I've sued them before in other cases, but sometimes the other things they can sue us, no repercussions coming out.
Yeah.
It doesn't work that way.
Yeah, unfortunately, oftentimes it does, depending on what their posture is. I think that's why
Sometimes
they
only
feel that way, but yeah.
So I have two quick questions. First, could you provide a quick breakdown? I know it's in here, but quick breakdown of the what those 48 full-time employees are, how many of those are actually attorneys, and then how they're divided between the civil and the prosecutor's office. And the second, just because you piqued my interest, if this is an appropriate time, how did we end up in federal court? It seems like a wrongful dismissal case should be, right down the middle, state law. No?
Our question is we attended
intentionally asked to remove the case of the federal court, and that's actually been a strategic move for us in terms of the release that we've gotten from the judge. Mr. Palsy may have some additional background that I am not recalling on how we ended up there. We've been there.
Keep in mind that everything is on the record, so if you feel it's inappropriate, it's fine to shut down this conversation.
Yeah, I can use that as a shield to hide the fact that I don't really recall the details of sitting around. But I think there may be a federal claim. Well, it has to be because otherwise we wouldn't be able to be it. So anyway, we can beat Jim up.
Okay.
So to help help Becky on this one, so civil, she's got 16 attorneys, and criminal, she's got 28, and she's got 4 support staff.
No, those are my total employees. So I have attorneys. I have 27 attorneys, 15 in criminal, 12 in civil, and the remaining of those numbers that Lance just went through are my support staff.
Okay.
Skewed towards, in terms of support staff numbers, those I don't know off the top of my head, but the vast majority of them are in criminal.
Right. That makes sense. Austin, do you have a question? Okay.
I was just gonna tell you that.
Becky,
Mr.
I think we did move some support to help the state out. Are we still maintaining those individuals?
We are. What we did is we moved a full-time position. Angela Garay, who is in our department, went over to the state effective after Labor Day, and she is working there full-time now. And her position is being funded by the state through sort of a complex reimbursement mechanism. We pay her, and then the state is going to reimburse us every quarter for that position. What we've done to backfill that position, the reason we reached that agreement for the state to fund that position was to allow us to not lose the level of prosecutors we need in our office. We have reached an agreement to hire on effectively a retired district attorney who is going to be working for us as a contract position, but she will basically be a full-time prosecutor in the prosecutor's office, making sure that Seneca has the full force of prosecuting attorneys that she needs.
Great. So let's
follow on that.
Yep.
I don't need an answer to this now, but I think I sent an email to Mr. Falsey, and I didn't realize that Seneca worked under you, to her asking for an update on the impacts of that relationship, that MOU. And so I'm hoping at a public safety committee sometime in the not too distant future, we can hear a report back. It's been half a year or so, and hear if it's working and how, if it is.
Sure thing. It has been only a month that the actual relationship has been in place. We executed that agreement in the spring, but with the anticipation that we would actually send both the APD officers and the prosecutor over in the early fall. Again, Angela went over after Labor Day. I think it was actually a week after Labor Day because she had a pre-scheduled vacation for the week, the immediate first week that she otherwise would have been there. And Mr. Falsey can correct me on this, but I believe that the police officers went over even a couple of weeks later. They've just been identified and gone over. So we could certainly arrange for an update, but it's
Maybe in
very
April.
early stages right
Yeah,
now.
maybe
It's
in
the
April.
first few weeks of the relationship.
March, April. That actually helps. It can belay that to March.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So, any other questions from Municipal Attorney? Never mind, she's got all the lawyers, so you don't want to make her mad. Okay, let's move on to the mayor. Thank you, Ms. Wynn Pearson.
No problem.
So in the mayor's budget, have some salary adjustments for a reduction in total amount of salaries for a reduction of about $60,000, and the mayor's office has been looking at how they can also support filling the gap. So similar to Mr. Slifka's situation, they're looking at how they're going to reduce their labor over the course of 2019 to about $100,000. So similarly, I don't believe they have any positions picked out right now, but they're going to manage that, their labor, next year.
Okay. Any questions for the mayor about his budget?
Hopefully not, it's not
No?
I was here a minute ago.
That's right. You don't show up to the meeting,
That was our
you get
chance.
zeroed out.
Lawyers are gone.
All right, you settle.
Quick question.
Settle.
Can you give us a breakdown of how many organizations get a mayoral grant, if you will?
Yes.
I know there's a bunch of them. I'd like a breakdown on them because I'd rather try and move some over to the assembly to look at some of these decisions on just being grants to organizations. So I need a breakdown of how much money we're talking about organizations. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Okay. Any other questions for the mayor's budget? If not, we'll go on to OMB.
The last slide is office management and budget. And inside our budget, we had a $100,000 one-time hit of money that we were going to hire a contractor to help us evaluate some of the department's operations and costs. While I have a RFP drafted, I haven't been able to pull that one off yet, so while I expect to get it started, I don't expect to spend it all in 2018. We had a one-time hit of money to help AWU with their rate case, which is currently in front of the RCA. We had one person, Darlene, who retired, and when she retired, we'll replace that with a new position. Our total amount of salary adjustments for 19 are going to go down. And then again, AWU is going to be doing a rate case, so we will once again support them. We'll be charging AWU through an IGC. We've asked the administration if we could have $75,000 in professional services contract to help us through our budgeting process. We have had the benefit in the past to have someone help us with our IGCs and some analysis in support of other departments that some of their needs from a budget perspective, so we've benefited from that. So as far as personnel is concerned, we still have 5 folks. Primarily, one of these individuals is 100%, no kidding, a hard time dedicated to SAP, and then Marilyn and Courtney and myself are working on the budget. And let's not kid ourselves, Marilyn and Courtney are working on the budget, and then they're responsible for helping all of the departments. We hired someone new in our shop as our admin officer, and she's an amazing individual. It's turned out great. So that's what's going on in O&D.
Mr. Peterson, you have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, what increase is AWW filing for this year?
So this year, I think it's water. Do you remember what the rate case is this year for Maryland? No, I don't remember which one it is, but I'm both. Okay. And then they expect to file again next year, so we will be assisting them.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Constant.
So I see the AWW rate case here, and it makes me contemplate if you have been thinking about what happens if on the 4th of December we approve the transaction MLP. Does that cause a major boost of work in your office to try to figure out the similar questions, RCA, IGCs, and how do all these mechanics work? And do you have an increase of staff available to help tackle that, or how are we going to address that?
So we do not have an increase in staff to tackle that. We are already planning our 2019 first quarter revisions and the steps that have to happen to get there, and we have prepared a calendar for the next budget cycle. And with the anticipation of the actual transaction occurring, the sale of ML&P probably after June, maybe sometime near September, the amount of time and there's a lot of pieces at play.
Yes, okay. You're planning it. That's good.
But we are thinking about it in a variety of different ways, because they're not going to only affect O&B. Now we build 20. They're going to affect finance. They're going to affect IT. They're going to affect everything. So we're thinking ahead.
Are those kind of costs that Mr. Constant just highlighted, are those built into, I think it was $3.5 million for as part of the sale price for closing costs, or is that something additional that we need to think about basically paying out of our operating budget?
So we've shared, I think every department has shared at the request of the municipal attorney, any of those types of things that we need to be thinking about from every department, whether it's, so we've shared those with the negotiating team and how they're bringing those pieces in together. Some of it's a matter of money, and some of it's just a matter of the process and time.
Yeah.
And
with the staff.
So we're thinking about the process and time.
But time is money, right?
There are costs which are not part of the transaction costs that are not being funneled on the balance sheet, that will only occur if we actually do close. And the big one, unsurprisingly, is SAP. We'll have to reconfigure SAP to pull MLP back out so that when we reconcile funds, it's not looking for MLP funds that aren't there. We believe that the way that we will attend to that is from the summary of economic effects that we distributed at the Enterprise and Utility Commission yesterday, which should be on the new agenda in some form or fashion, that there should be an amount of free cash that comes out of MLP that should cover that expense. So that's our going forward plan, but it ripens up when it becomes more real as we get closer and closer to something.
Okay, Mr. Constant?
Then I think for Susie and Ona and her, expectation management, then that's probably one area to put into the conversation about SAP, that there might be a hit that comes next year just in relationship to making it work after we say sayonara. And so, but that's okay because we can see it coming, which is great. It's easier to vote yes on a thing you see coming than it is on something that came out of nowhere.
Okay, well, that's the end. Somehow we made it. Any other questions or comments from Mr. Wilbur? Mr. Wilbur, yourself.
Just comment. Every year when we build this thing, it is not without a lot of discussion and debate and negotiation from all of the departments to get to what we provided to you. So we try to make it as clean and simple as possible, but I have to compliment the department heads who have been very helpful and very supportive and very timely in our requests, both also for the execs who have to sort of make the decisions when we're making a choice about what we're going to put in this thing. And again, my staff, Marilyn and Courtney, are amazing.
Okay. Any other comments or questions from Mr. Wilbur? Not seeing any. We have time for audience participation. Anyone from the public would like to speak? No? Great. This work session is closed.